Committee come to order. Today we continue the FY24 budget hearings with the United States Army. I want to thank our witnesses for being here. In general, this will be the last time you testify before our committee, and I want you to know we appreciate your leadership and your service to our country. You have been a dedicated servant to the men and women of the United States Army, and I want to commend you for completing the Boston Marathon on Monday of this week in four and a half hours.
A little more than that, but pretty close.
Yeah.
I won the Joint Chiefs category.
Yeah.
The record's still intact.
I couldn't have done it in 4.5 days, so I'm really proud of you. The Army is seeking $185.5 billion in this fiscal year. That amounts to an increase of less than 0.2%. Given today's rate of inflation, the President's budget effectively cuts the Army by over 5%. The President's budget cuts Army procurement, slashing combat vehicle acquisition by 16% and new aircrafts by 22%. It cuts overall Army research and development by 8%. That includes a whopping 42% reduction in early-stage research and development projects that are critical to Army modernization efforts. Finally, it cuts military construction by 32%. Most disturbingly, that includes 20% cut to family housing. It's clear the Army is yet again the bill payer for the Pentagon. Unless Congress acts, the Army will struggle to manage the risk these cuts present. This will be especially hard to deal with in the near term, as the Army is the lead supplier of drawdown assistance for Ukraine. Making matters worse is the fact that the Army is struggling with historic recruiting crisis. The Army missed their recruiting goal by over 15,000 soldiers last year. All the signs point to the service being unable to meet their recruiting goals again this year. That's unacceptable. We need to understand what actions our witnesses are taking to overcome this crisis. This committee stands ready to change laws and eliminate misguided DOD policies that act as barriers to men and women interested in a career in the armed services. If we're going to deter China, we need to recruit the best and the brightest. We need to provide them with the training, skills, and capabilities necessary to succeed on future battlefields. And we need to improve their quality of life to ensure we retain them in today's competitive employment environment. I look forward to working with my colleagues on these priorities, and I look forward to yielding to my colleague and the ranking member for any opening statement he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that, and welcome to our witnesses. I want to join you in thanking General McConville for his service, and he's been just an outstanding partner on this committee through some interesting challenges during your tenure. You will be missed, but congratulations on the impending retirement, and thank you very much for your service. And Secretary Wormuth, welcome. We look forward to your testimony as well. I think the chairman laid out fairly clearly the challenges. It is modernization and recruitment in a nutshell, and would be really interested in hearing from our witnesses today how modernization is going within the Army, what the role of the Army is going forward in meeting all of our national security challenges. Certainly, China is, as we always hear, the pacing threat, but there are many challenges, and the Army plays a key role in all of that. How does modernization affect that? How are you going to be able to meet those challenges going forward? We do not have infinite resources, and as we've discussed in this committee, modernization is a huge priority in a number of different areas. We have to make choices somewhere. I personally think the President has made the right choice. A $860 billion budget roughly should be enough to defend this country. Its question is, how do we spend those dollars? But I do want to hear from both of our witnesses how the Army is doing that, and then the recruitment issue. The people are obviously the backbone of the Army, the backbone of our military, and it has been a challenging time. It is worth pointing out that during COVID, you were significantly hamstrung in your ability to recruit, and this is the period where that would be coming through. And that is in some ways reassuring, but on the other hand, there were challenges before COVID, and there are challenges that are unrelated to COVID. So do definitely want to hear how you plan to meet those challenges, what your level of optimism is that we can recruit the soldiers that we need to make sure that the Army meets all of those modernization goals. And then lastly is the issue of quality of life, which is connected, of course, to recruitment and retention. But this committee has done a lot in a bipartisan and bicameral way to increase increase basic housing allowance, to increase pay, to find a variety of different ways to increase the overall compensation and support for service members and their families. We want to know how that's going, what more we can do to make sure that we're meeting those needs going forward. And with that, I look forward to the testimony and the questions and answers, and I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Today our witnesses are the Honorable Christine Wormuth, Secretary of the Army, and General James McConville, Chief of Staff of the Army. Welcome to our witnesses. And I will start with questions. I want to prepare the witnesses. We have a 5-minute rule. I believe you've got the clocks in front of you. When we get to 5 minutes, whether you're in the middle of the answer or not, I don't mean to be rude, but I'm going to stop the time so we move on so everybody knows I'm treating everybody the same on the dais. So let me start with so what? You can recognize them for opening statements. Oh, let me recognize Secretary Wormuth for your opening statement.
Good morning, Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member Smith, and distinguished members of the committee. Thank you for your support as we continue to build the Army of 2030. And I want to apologize up front. I have a bit of a cold, so I'll try not to cough too much. We're pleased to be here before you today. I'm joined by General McConville, and I also want to thank him for his decades of service. I'm grateful to work with him every day. We've accomplished a lot this year, but we still have a lot of work ahead of us. We continue to be focused on our 3 main priorities: people, modernization, and readiness. The FY24 budget enables us to support the National Defense Strategy, provide ready forces to our combatant commanders, and take care of our people. By investing over $39 billion in procurement and RDT&E, we're maintaining our momentum in our modernization programs, and we're largely on track to bring 24 of our programs over the finish line in 2023. This is a big year for long-range precision fires. Prototypes of the precision strike missile, the mid-range capability, and the long-range hypersonic weapon will be in the hands of soldiers this fiscal year. It's also a big year for next-generation combat vehicles. Mobile protective firepower is in production, and the AMP-V is also being fielded. And it's a big year for our integrated air and missile defenses, as well as the Future Vertical Lift program. As we shift from 2 decades of counterinsurgency and counterterrorism operations to large-scale combat operations, we're also transforming our force structure. We are going to have to adapt our force structure to make room for things like our multi-domain task forces and other new units like the indirect fire protection capability and our MSHORAD battalions. We are a ready Army, and we continue to emphasize readiness in everything we do. We're funding 22 combat training center rotations this year. We have a robust exercise program, and we're implementing our new readiness model, which helps us balance modernization, training, and ongoing missions. We're also investing in Army preposition stocks, which have served us very well in Europe and will serve us in other theaters in the future. To assist Ukraine in fighting against Russia, the Army has provided over $20 billion in lethal assistance in the form of a wide range of munitions, radars, combat vehicles, and many other pieces. One of the most important lessons we've learned from the war in Ukraine is the need for a more robust defense industrial base. So in our budget this year, we've invested $1.5 billion in our ammo plants, our arsenals, and our depots. We're also working very closely with our partners in the defense industry to increase their munitions production so that we can continue not only to help the Ukrainians, but also importantly to replenish our own stocks. Even as our soldiers provide lethal assistance to Ukraine and train Ukrainian soldiers, we haven't taken our eye off the pacing challenge of China. Indo-PACOM may be a theater named after 2 oceans, but the Army has an important role to play there. The best way to avoid fighting a war is to show you can win any war you might have to fight. The Army is contributing to strengthening deterrence every day in the Indo-Pacific as we campaign in the region through exercises and robust partnerships. And if deterrence fails, the Army will be a key player on the joint team in the event of a conflict. As important as it is to build new weapon systems and maintain our readiness, people are the strength of our Army. This budget increases soldier and Department of Army civilian pay by 5.2% and funds important quality of life improvements like family housing, child care initiatives, and new and renovated barracks. We want to build cohesive teams of soldiers that are trained, disciplined, and fit. So the Army is committed to building positive command climates across the force so that our soldiers can be all they can be. We're also continuing to strive to prevent suicide in our ranks. Suicide, as you all know, is a national challenge, but we have to do everything we can to reduce suicide in our Army. So we're pursuing a range of initiatives to make our soldiers more resilient. Our Army is the greatest Army in the world, but to keep it that way, we have to solve our recruiting challenges. The difficult recruiting landscape we face didn't happen in a year, and it's going to take us more than a year to turn this around. We are laser focused on this challenge, and we are not going to lower our standards to solve this problem. The whole of Army leadership is focused on improving our recruitment. We're generating positive momentum from initiatives like the Future Soldier Prep Course, our Soldier Referral Program, and our new reinvented marketing campaign, Be All You Can Be. Our efforts are geared towards one thing: reintroducing ourselves to the American public and inspiring a renewed call to service. We very much need your help in this effort if we're going to be successful. I'm proud of all that our soldiers do every day and look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. General, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Secretary, for your leadership, and good morning, Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member Smith, distinguished members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today and for your continued support. The United States Army exists for one purpose. That is to protect the nation by being ready to fight and win our nation's wars as a member of the joint force. To do this, the Army has set 3 clear priorities: people, readiness, and modernization, or in other words, future readiness. We have remained aggressively committed to these priorities while answering the nation's call during every crisis and every challenge. This year, the Army continues to undergo its greatest transformation in almost 50 years. We are delivering on modernization because we have been consistent and we have been persistent on our modernization priorities. Last year, we officially updated our capstone warfighting doctrine to multi-domain operations, which incorporates emerging lessons from Ukraine. We continue to stand up new organizations to support our doctrine. Last June, we reactivated the historic 11th Airborne Division in Alaska. In September, we stood up the 3rd of our 5 multi-domain task forces. As the Secretary noted, we are on track to field 24 weapon systems in 23. But at the end of the day, we must get the right people in the right place in order for any of these initiatives to be successful. And that is why people remain the Army's #1 priority. We want every person and every parent to know that service in the Army is a pathway to success, both in and out of uniform. Whether you serve for 4 years or you serve for over 40 years, the Army offers endless possibilities. We are not only a profession of arms, but we're also a profession of professions. You can be whatever you want to be in the United States Army. In fact, you can be all you can be. I'm often asked how people can help us, and my answer is inspire other young men and women to serve. Because when we get the call, we go with the Army we have. The Army we have is the world's greatest fighting force because we serve with the world's greatest soldiers. With your continued support, we're going to keep it that way. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, General. I want to ask both of you, we're going to get an authorization bill passed in a bipartisan fashion and on time, but if Congress doesn't do its job and doesn't get you an appropriations bill passed in a timely manner and you're stuck with a 2-year continuing resolution, how does that impact your ability to do the job that you just described? I'll start with you, Secretary Wormuth.
Well, Chairman, it would be, I think, a significant problem for us. First of all, at a time where we are competing against China, I think a CR is basically sort of us fighting with one hand tied behind our back. A CR would essentially tie down about $5.3 billion in terms of procurement programs. There are tens of procurement new starts that we would not be able to move out on. There are dozens of research, development, and testing new starts that we would not be able to move out on. So it would significantly
What about the pay raise
impede
you
us.
just described in your opening statement?
I'm sorry?
What about the pay raise for the troops that you included in your opening statement?
That would also be a problem for us.
You mentioned $1.5 billion that you were going to put into ammo production. Would you be able to do that?
Some of those programs would be delayed, sir.
Okay. General, what would it mean to you?
Well, Chairman, I think it's going to hurt our people. You talked about pay raises. You know, we got soldiers out there doing great things, and their families deserve a raise, and we need to get that to them. I'm concerned about the modernization. We often are criticized for being slow in modernization, but right now we have the opportunity to transform the Army, biggest one we've done in 40 years, and new starts, production increases. As all you know, those things don't happen under a CR.
You've got the responsibility to resupply our stocks and at the same time supply Ukraine and Taiwan, trying to help them. Can you tell us how the Army's trying to achieve those goals?
Yeah, you want to go, Secretary?
I'll start and then after you. We're really doing three different things, Chairman. First of all, we're investing in our organic industrial base. Like I said, $1.5 billion. And that's helping us be able to, for example, expand capacity at the plant at Scranton that makes 155 millimeter casings. We're also working really closely with defense industry to basically take the money Congress has given us, get it on contract, and allow them to expand their capacity and also the speed of their production. So
And on that point, do you have enough multi-year contracting authority to be able to make those, get those industries to be able to expand, or not?
Multi-year procurement authority is very helpful. We've asked in this budget request, we've asked for a couple more authorities.
Okay, good. General?
No, I just, along with what the Secretary says, what we've seen is, industry works on contracts, they don't work on enthusiasm. So as we talk about the things we need, we have to replenish our war stocks. And as we like to say, with the weapon systems we're giving, we're not buying new old stuff. So as we give them systems, we're going to buy the new modernization systems. And so we're able to transform the Army with your support as we go through this.
Okay, I'm really interested in the $1.5 billion for ammo production. We've really seen an exposure of our lack of capability in the organic industrial base. Tell us more about how you're going to spend this $1.5 billion.
Well, Chairman, we have 23 different ammo plants, arsenals, and depots around the country, as you know well. And that $1.5 billion is basically going into trying to modernize those plants. In some cases, it's putting in new machining tools. In some cases, it's putting in new software. But as you know, a lot of those plants were built in the wake of World War II, so there's a lot of work to be done there. And it's part of a broader 15-year, $18 billion plan to upgrade our organic industrial base.
Some of them are older than that. Have you projected what kind of capacity increase you will get as a result of that investment, or do you know?
Well, for example, with the 155 millimeter shells, we went from 14,000 production a month to 20,000 a month, and in 2 years we'll have more than 75,000 a month being produced. So it's going to take a little time, but it's a good upward ramp.
Well, this conflict in Ukraine has exposed the inadequate capability that we have now to produce ammunition. And I just didn't know if this alone is going to get us to a good place, or are we going to need to overlay more on top of that particular sector of production in our country to make sure we have ammo that we need in the future?
My sense is, sir, we're going to need to do more because, again, I think one thing that the war in Ukraine has shown us is that the estimates that we've made about munitions for future conflicts are low. So I think we're going to have to keep working.
Thank you. I yield to the ranking member.
Thank you. General, I appreciate your reference to some of the old slogans of the Army there, be all you can be. I always like the one, we do more before 9 a.m. than most people do all day. My wife and I used to joke with our children that you do less all day than most people do before 9 a.m. So, but sadly, most people didn't get that joke, so appreciate you bringing that up. On the modernization piece, the role of information systems and making sure that the JADC2 idea of joint all-domain command and control, making sure that it is integrated. Can you describe a little bit how that challenge is going in the Army? Because one of the concerns is, how do you truly make that joint? The Army's doing their thing, the Air Force is doing their thing, the Navy's doing their thing. How is that piece of modernization coming together for the Army, for both of you?
I'm sure that General McConville will want to comment on this, Representative Smith, but what I would say is the primary way the Army has been trying to contribute to JADC2 is through our Project Convergence set of experimentation and exercises. We have a joint board of directors for that set of exercises, so we have the Marines, the Air Force, the Navy, the Space Force working with us. And what we've been doing for the last couple of years now is really coming together in the dirt, trying to see if we can get our different platforms to connect to each other and to share data, data from different sensors to different shooters. And we've been doing that successfully. I think there's still more work to be done, but I think the work we've been doing is widely seen as very joint.
Are there gaps in the resources there? Is there like a program that, gosh, if we had another, $500 million, you could make progress? Or is it more just a matter of trying to integrate very complicated systems?
I think more resources would undoubtedly be helpful, and the Raider Fund that the deputy has established is something that we've been looking at. Part of it is, as the chief likes to say, is services, we tend to do what's in our own interests. So I think part of what we're experiencing is coming together and seeing how we can find common interest in building this vision.
Yeah, and we're seeing a lot of grassroots efforts because people realize the importance of being able to move data very, very quickly between sensors and shooters. If you want to do long-range precision fires, you have to do long-range precision targeting, and you have to do that at the time of relevance. So we're seeing that. As a secretary, one other thing I would add is we've stood up, we call it a Combined Joint Systems Integration Laboratory. It's up at Aberdeen. And what we do is we bring together the boxes. It's really about black boxes passing data between different weapon systems. And you have to be able to do that in a laboratory environment before you can actually bring it out to the desert if you want to see it work. And we're on our third iteration. Each time we get better. Each time we get smarter people to help us understand the best way to move data through a data fabric and how you're going to do this. And now we're starting to bring in our allies and partners, so it's actually moving to a CJADC2, or Combined Joint All-Domain Control System, because we're always going to fight with allies and partners, and they are very interested in joining this effort.
That's great. Thank you. And then on the recruitment and retention issue, just focusing on compensation, particularly for your new service members, new soldiers who are coming in. They're starting at a relatively low pay level. And there are a number of stories about some of them are struggling just basically to put food on the table in some instances. We talked a little bit about this when we met yesterday. And some of that is economic choices. There's a whole lot of things that go into that. But in terms of making sure that, and this affects recruitment, obviously, if you're coming in, you want to make sure that you're being paid enough to support yourself and potentially your family. What are the keys to sort of getting to a better place on that?
I think, Congressman, we need to do a couple of things. One thing we pay a lot of attention to in the Army is financial literacy for our soldiers, so that they know how to make a budget, how to live under a budget, how to plan ahead. That's really important, and we make sure that our soldiers get that kind of training and those resources at multiple points in their experience in the Army. This budget calls for a pay raise for soldiers. The department has done a lot to try to help soldiers deal with inflation and rising costs of housing, for example, so we've increased BAH in a number of different places. And then the next big thing we're going to do, as we talked about yesterday, is look at the quadrennial military compensation review to see whether we've got the actual pay rates set appropriately for soldiers.
Okay.
Yeah, I just had, what I worry most about is our young soldiers with families. There are soldiers that are single, they live in the barracks, and we provide them food, so a lot of their decisions are choices. But, if you're not living on an Army post and you have to go out into the civilian sector, and some of these places have high cost of living, you're trying to live, you're trying to have a family, that's expensive for our young soldiers. So we watch that carefully with the housing allowances and the cost of living allowances, and I think that's where our biggest vulnerability is.
I'm out of time, so thank you very much.
Chair now recognizes the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Wilson, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chairman. And thank Madam Secretary General, thank you for being here today. And General McConville, I want to congratulate you on 42 years of service. You beat me by 11. But we look forward to you coming back and your input over the years. I'm grateful of the service of all the soldiers at the greatest installation within the United States, Fort Jackson, South Carolina. The leadership of Brigadier General Jason Kelly is so inspiring. The U.S. Army Training Center at Fort Jackson plays a critical role in the recruitment, training, and retention of soldiers through the Future Soldiers Preparatory Course and graduating over 50% of all soldiers through basic combat training. With that in mind, we appreciate the recent and upcoming changes to the Army recruitment and retention policies, General, or the programs as the Army continues to face a declining pool of potential recruits. How are these policies and programs expected to impact the Army's overall readiness and effectiveness, General?
Well, Congress, first of all, we're very proud of what Fort Jackson does every single day for our soldiers. But this new innovative program we've stood up at Fort Jackson, the Future Soldiers Prep Course, there's something there. And, you know, the Secretary and I have made a blood oath. We're not going to lower standards to bring soldiers in. Quality is more important than quantity. So we're going to invest in young men and women. And we've had about 7,000 to 8,000 young men and women go through the program at Fort Jackson, and about 95% are making it into basic training and they're excelling it. So I think our strategy has to be the young men and women are having a hard time passing our ASVAB, they're having a hard time meeting our physical standards, and we are willing to invest in them, and that's what we need to make sure. So when parents ask, you know, why should my kid serve? Because your kid can be all they can be, and we want to help them be that.
Well, I look at what you're doing is providing opportunities, defending our country. All credit to my wife. I've got 4 sons that have served in the overseas in the U.S. military, and it's the most significant portion of their life. So thank you for what you're doing. And Secretary, at this very moment, the courageous Ukrainians are involved in the largest artillery battles of World War II, stopping war criminal Putin. They're using M777 howitzers, which no longer in production, and the Paladin integrated management. So I was disappointed to see the PIM program cut in this year's budget. And to me, war criminal Putin, the Chinese Communist Party threats to America, the Iranian regime pledge of death to Israel, death to America, they must be deterred. And the way to do that, and given the prominent role of Ukraine and the global demand for this capability, how does the Army justify cuts? Would you agree that maintaining the capacity to produce artillery is vital to America's national security? And I'm concerned that the production of our only armored mobile howitzer at a critical time when its need is so vital, and we stand to benefit from full-rate production efficiencies to defeat war criminal Putin. What's being done?
Congressman, I absolutely agree with you that everything we see in Ukraine shows the importance of artillery, and we see that for future battles. That's why we put so much emphasis on long-range precision fires for the future. The reason that we've made the choices that we've made about Paladin in the budget is we're trying to strike a balance. You know, the Paladin is an enduring system. It's still very relevant for us. We need it. So we're trying to continue to invest in that while also taking our resources and investing in the new systems that we're developing, things like the extended range cannon artillery, for example. So we think we've put enough in there to keep the production going, but also being able to invest in new systems.
And indeed, the importance of what you're doing with the circumstances that we have. Yesterday, the incarceration, imprisonment of Vladimir Kara-Murza in Moscow, the oppression, by my view, of Putin, of the people of Russia. We must, again, and I want to urge both of you that we expedite long-range HIMAR, whatever, to deter the aggression, the mass murder being conducted. General, as a Army guy myself, it never occurred to me what Putin's doing, and that is to attack civilian targets and then to attack the EMS personnel and the fire departments, and then the real target be to kill the civilian first responders. And so this atrocity must stop, and you're in position to help do that. Thank you. I yield back.
Chair, now recognize the gentleman from Connecticut, Mr. Courtney, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And General McConville, again, I want to join my colleagues in congratulating you on your great career. The Massachusetts brain train on the Joint Chiefs is going to be pretty steep this year, but I just want to say, hearing a Boston accent, I find very soothing at these hearings. So again, I want to, thank you for your great work. Secretary Wormuth, again, the announcement yesterday by Sikorsky that they're not going to go to court to appeal GAO's decision sort of still begs a lot of questions. Again, I'm sure we're going to spend some time going through the forensics of that decision. But again, moving forward, the Army has stated a number of times that the Valor is not going to be a one-for-one replacement for Blackhawks. Again, given the number of Blackhawks that the Army operates, it's about 2,000. It's hard to visualize that there would be that many Valors purchased there. So, but that sort of begs the question of just, you know, what is the plan, you know, in terms of Black Hawk, you know, acquisition, which is probably going to continue for decades. I mean, the first Bell is not even going to come off until 2030. So, I mean, that's a pretty long time. It's within the Davidson window. So maybe you could just talk about that for a minute in terms of what, you know, the Block 2 program is for Black Hawk and where the Army sees Black Hawk's role.
Certainly, Congressman, and I'm sure General McConville, as an aviator, will want to add to this. First of all, you're absolutely right. We are not going to be bringing, you know, online the new FLRAA platform for some years, even though we have down-selected, obviously, a partner with that. Black Hawk is a great helicopter and will continue to be an important part of the Army fleet. So, you know, I would expect that we will continue to have thousands of Black Hawks in our fleet. We will need to sustain them. You know, the terrific industrial base in Connecticut that is so critical to the Black Hawk program is going to very much still be needed because it will take us some time to start bringing in the new helicopter.
No, I would second what the Secretary said. The Black Hawk is a great helicopter. One of my sons flies the Black Hawk, you know, and it's in our Special Operation Forces at the 101st. It's going to continue to be the mainstay of medium lift helicopters. And I see for the next 40, 60 years, I see us continuing to incrementally improve that system. And I see many of our allies and partners taking a hard look at that's the type of aircraft they have. So it's going to be around for a long time. And I think it falls into what we've talked about, that enduring category. We're going to keep it. We're going to incrementally improve it as we bring on the new systems. They're going to give us much greater range and much greater speed in areas where we need them. We'll use those systems, but the Black Hawk's going to be around for a long time.
So Congresswoman DeLauro and I actually flew on a Coast Guard Jayhawk during the Easter break. And again, the sea services obviously are another sort of customer that, you know, honestly, the Bell platform just does not work in terms of landing them on whether it's Coast Guard ships or Navy ships. So again, like I said, we're going to have plenty of time to, like I said, pick through the entrails of this and, you know, look forward to working with you. You know, on the recruitment question, I thought the Army actually did something pretty interesting, which is you conducted a survey to sort of, you know, find out what's sort of going on in terms of, you know, military age eligible Americans in terms of their, you know, thoughts about the Army. And obviously we're living in a time with an economy with almost 10 million job openings out there. So there's lots of choices out there. Can you talk a little bit about what that survey showed you in terms of just, you know, how do we address this recruiting challenge?
Sure, Congressman. We surveyed 2,400 people between the ages of 16 and 28 to try to frankly understand, you know, how do they see the Army? What do they think about the Army? And we found a few things, you know, in terms of, and specifically the survey was really focused on what did people see in that age group as obstacles to service. And what we found was the number one fear was fear of death or injury. There was sometimes a fear of psychological harm or a fear of leaving friends and family. And then after that, it was sort of a fear of the Army somehow putting your life on hold. So one of the things we're really trying to do is emphasize the tremendous range of opportunities that the Army offers, you know, and the Be All You Can Be campaign really tries to speak to that.
Great. I mean, obviously there's the culture war sort of backdrop to this there, but that really came in very low, right, in terms of just the, you know, that being a barrier?
Yes. Concerns about, for example, you know, the wokeness in the military or the COVID vaccine mandate, for example, those were relatively low on the list of barriers to service.
Thank you, gentlemen. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Lambert, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you both for your contribution to our country's national defense. And there's a couple of important future weapons programs I want to ask you about in a minute. But first of all, I need to drill down on a local issue of extreme concern. Secretary Wormuth, I'm still deeply concerned by the poor housing conditions at Fort Carson in my district. Soldiers at that base and their families face poor living conditions and maintenance which is hard to come by. The promise of modern and improved housing has been held hostage by severe construction delays. In the Army's annual housing survey released last year, Fort Carson ranked last in some of the categories for resident satisfaction. Just last month, a pregnant woman fell through the floor at her house because of poor maintenance. This is alarming and completely unacceptable. Construction on the Cherokee West neighborhood has not even started as the design continues to be redone. So each time I raise concerns to senior Army personnel, I am assured that these issues would be highly prioritized and resolved quickly, but this has not yet happened. The soldiers at Fort Carson and their families who sacrifice for our country daily deserve resolution of these issues immediately. Will you commit today that you will urgently prioritize improving the housing conditions at Fort Carson and addressing these pervasive problems?
I will, Congressman. I will talk to General Omar Jones, our installation commander, today about the kinds of things that you're raising.
Well, thank you. I'll be following up with you on that. I'm sure Fort Carson isn't the only Army base that's facing serious housing challenges. Can you or either of you elaborate on how you plan to resolve these continuing issues, especially maintenance and modernizing base housing?
Yes, Congressman. I actually was, when I went to Fort Carson last, I went to see the Cherokee West neighborhood, and they were just getting started to do that demolition. You know, Balfour Beatty, the company that provides the housing at Fort Carson, is a company that, you know, we are scrutinizing intensely, I think it's fair to say. We also have some challenges with them down at Fort Gordon, and one of my assistant secretaries was just there the other day. So we are working very, very closely, and BBC knows that, to make sure that they are living up to their contractual obligations. One of the challenges that BBC has, along with some of our other privatized housing partners, is hiring and retaining maintenance workers. That is part of the challenge, is, you know, we are all facing a war for talent and a war for workers, but we're really encouraging companies like BBC to make sure that they are paying for and retaining maintenance workers so that they can go through those work orders quickly.
Thank you, General. Anything you want to add?
No, as the Secretary said, we have a sacred obligation to make sure that our families and soldiers have quality housing, and we are committed to doing that. And when it doesn't happen, we got to fix it.
Okay, thank you. Now, changing gears for both of you, I'm excited that the Army will be fielding the long-range hypersonic weapon LRHW later this year. It'll be the nation's first operational hypersonic capability. However, I understand that a test scheduled to occur last month was scrubbed, so I'm concerned that we might be facing some delays. Can you give us an updated testing and fielding schedule with the committee?
Congressman, I'd be happy to talk more in a closed session with you about that. We are rescheduling the tests that we had to scrub, so I think we'll be okay on that. And I also just wanted to emphasize that the battery at JBLM that will eventually field that weapon system is already training with their equipment. They've already been moving their equipment on to C-17, so I think we're still going to be on track.
Okay, good. And General, what kind of capability will this give you that helps you and your successors to better operate?
Well, you know, we've seen it played out in Ukraine. People talked about HIMARS being a game changer as long-range precision fires, but this is really long-range precision fires, and the speed and range that you get gives you options, quite frankly, to deter those who may be wishing us harm.
And General, since I've got you here, maybe my last chance to ask you a question. We have some good developments in the area of directed energy with shooting down, short-range air defense, SHORAD. What are your plans for that in the future?
Yeah, I think it's an option. It's an arrow in the quiver, and this gets to convergence where we have multiple sensors and we start looking at swarms of UAVs and other type systems coming in. We got to be able to react very quickly. You got to pick the right arrow and be able to respond to.
Thank you.
Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Garamendi, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you so very much, General, for your long service and your work with all of us. I appreciate that. Madam Secretary, you've been focused on many things, one of which we haven't talked about. But before I go to you, General, we were recently in a congressional delegation led by the chairman, and we were able to observe in Romania and Poland the extraordinary work being done by the 101st as they rotated in and eventually will rotate out, very, very impressive in delivering the necessary supplies, weapons, munitions into Ukraine and tracking and keeping a clear record of our efforts to arm. And so thank you. Madam Secretary, you recently issued a report on how the Army can deal with climate change, resiliency in the face of a changing climate, but also reducing greenhouse gas emissions. I'd like you to speak to that for a few moments.
Certainly, Congressman. Yes, we put out a climate strategy that had some ambitious goals in terms of, for example, fully electrifying our non-tactical vehicles by 2035, for example. And we are working on that. Frankly, one of the limiting factors is the availability of electric vehicles, writ large, but we are working to purchase those. We're also investing quite a bit in the resilience of our installations. As you know, in California, basically no matter where you are in the country, you're either experiencing drought or wildfires or floods. We've got to make sure that our installations remain functional throughout that extreme weather so that our soldiers can train. So we're investing in microgrids, for example, so that we can have the ability to continue to generate power. And then we're also investing in looking at hybrid vehicles, for example. This is sort of farther off, but I saw, for example, a hybrid Bradley fighting vehicle, which is not only more fuel efficient than the conventional Bradley, but it's also quieter, which has some lethality, survivability benefits. And it also is going to, because it's more fuel efficient, it could potentially reduce the fuel convoys in the future and the numbers of soldiers that are exposed to danger. So those are farther in the future, but I think it's important for us to explore that.
Thank you very much. I urge you to continue to press forward on all of those efforts, particularly the hybridization of the tactical vehicles. It may be not so difficult in that the downtime, I think, General, you still hurry up and wait a lot. And so the waiting is, the turbine can be going, or the diesel engine can be going, or it could be battery-powered communications and the rest. So I urge you to continue to process that. I'd like to go back to the issue of the new systems that you're bringing online. And I'd like both of you to speak to the vulnerability of the systems coming online if we delay the appropriations and the authorization and have a CR. So once again, drive home that issue so that we might actually be listening to your concerns.
Thank you, Congressman. Again, this is the most significant modernization of the Army in the last 40 years. And a CR, particularly a long-term CR, will significantly slow down that modernization effort at precisely the time where we're trying to compete with China. So we will have, as I said, tens of new start procurement programs that we wouldn't be able to move forward. The same with our research and development programs. It's really about $5.3 billion of programs that would be affected. So it would be a substantial delay and impediment for us.
If you could provide us with the specific list.
Be happy to do that.
Amongst us, we have advocates for one or another of those programs, and we ought to know what happens if we have a CR.
We would be happy to do that.
Please do that. General, would you like to comment on that issue?
Yeah, well, I think I think the Secretary covered well on the modernization effort. But again, I come back to the soldiers and their families and training and readiness. If you don't know, what tends to happen in units, and it's hard to capture, is they slow down spending, and so they're not doing maybe the training they need. So, or they don't get the increases that they need to pay for those things, and the system slows down. And, as a result, you can't make up for that training that those soldiers didn't get or those benefits they didn't get. So I just would ask, anything we can do to avoid a CR would be very helpful for the military.
Thank you. Yield back, sir.
Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Whitman, for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Wormuth, General McConville, thanks so much for joining us today. Thanks again for your service to our nation. General McConville, great to see you again from this past Saturday there in Boston, and thanks again for your incredible service to our nation and for your family's legacy of service. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I want to begin by talking about where the Army is and what I think is a position that's very precarious in the restructuring to address the challenges in the Indo-PACOM. In fact, I think the things that are there are lacking. I see the Army's divesting in watercraft and logistics connectors. There's some challenges, too, in creating the necessary communications network there, and for that matter, continuation of logistics in the Indo-PACOM. I think that it appears to me at this point that the Army is not as well prepared as it needs to be for the challenges that are going to be there in the Indo-PACOM. Listen, we know combined arms maneuver has a place in Europe. We've seen that today. I think it's going to be minimally important in any sort of scenario we see in the Indo-PACOM. And I just want to get your perspective on what do you think are the principal lines of effort that the Army needs to accentuate to make sure that the Army is up for the challenge in the Indo-PACOM AOR, and for that matter, specifically up to the challenge that we face from China?
Congressman, I would answer your question this way. You know, I think the Army will do a number of important things in an Indo-PACOM conflict, if there were to be one. First of all, we would be the primary force that would be establishing and building out staging bases for air and maritime forces. You know, ships are going to have to come to shore to refuel, reload, et cetera, and the same thing with airplanes. You know, we will be protecting then those staging bases with integrated air and missile defenses. I think, you know, we have a role to play, a huge role to play in terms of logistics and sustainment, you know, which you mentioned. And we are investing in those areas. You know, we are investing, we're also, you know, looking at, we'll play, I think, an important command and control role as well. So we're investing in Army preposition stocks in Indo-PACOM. We're investing in deep sensing capabilities oriented at Indo-PACOM. We're investing in Patriot, IFPC for Indo-PACOM. Those are all, I think, really important roles that the Army would play out in that theater.
General McConville?
Yeah, I would just add on the contested logistics, you know, we're seeing that play out in Ukraine, is if you can't resupply or sustain your forces, they're not very effective. And it's magnified in the Indo-Pacific, as you said, sir, because the distance are great. It is more a maritime capabilities. And so some of the things that we're developing is the ability to operate in that environment. We just stood up a cross-functional team for contested logistics. Many of our systems that we're building, like long-range precision fighters, they're long-range and they go fast because that's what the theater demands. The aircraft we're bringing on board, they go much further ranges, they go faster. And air and missile defense is really going to be important out there. And what we think is important is the convergence factor, because we're going to be working as a joint force. We got to have deep sensors, and if you're going to do long-range precision fires, you have to do long-range precision targeting. You have to take advantage of space and other capabilities we have to do that. You have to work as a joint and coalition team, and we're doing all that right now, and we certainly can do more.
Well, listen, I think long-range precision fires in that theater are going to be key. I think that's an important role for the Army to play. The question is timing. We have to get that capability quickly. I like what you all are doing in taking current technology and putting that in form the Army can use. I still, though, have deep concerns about the logistical element. The Army's divesting in watercraft. In fact, in Fort Eustis, Virginia, is that logistics center there. I see it. I watch those Army ships, unfortunately, go away. We see the Ready Reserve fleet is now down to 40 ships. I guarantee if there was a turbo activation today, all 40 of them would not be certified to go to sea. So the Army is going to be really stretched in order to respond if the balloon goes up in the Indo-PACOM. Give me some sense about what you see as far as logistics. It's great to be developing these platforms, but you got to be able to get to the fight and then, as you said, sustain the operations in the fight. And we can go into weapons magazines later, but I just want to get your perspective on. Give me some sense about what the Army's doing to address the logistics tail.
Congressman, you're right. The Army made a decision a few years ago to divest of watercraft. Frankly, I think before everyone was as fully focused as we needed to be on the Indo-Pacific. But we are now reinvesting, if you will. So, for example, this year's budget has $180 million for...
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Norcross.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to thank the witnesses for being here today, in general, for your lifetime of service. Excuse me, much appreciated. I want to start by focusing on our industrial base. And when we take a look over the course of the last few months, obviously we've seen a tremendous strain on the munitions industrial base. This is something that we've been working on, quite frankly, for the last 3.5 years as part of our tactical air and land. Very early on, we noticed that we were looking at an industrial base that literally reflected World War II. And we accelerated much of the improvements that needed to be done, from modernizing, the safety improvements, but incredibly the capacity, which had we not started then, I think where we are today would be in much, much worse space. So Secretary Wormuth, just wanted to get a view from what you see as the highest risk and most urgent from a technical standpoint, where you see that industrial base, even with the investments that we've made. That 10-year plan has been shortened down to 8, and I think should be even more resources. Where technically do you think our biggest challenges?
Well, Congressman, I mean, as you said, there are a number of challenges. The Army's organic industrial base is very, very old. I think it's fair to say it's vintage in a lot of our arsenals and depots. So there's a lot of work to be done. Some of it is just putting in new machining tools. Some of it is bringing in new, more automated systems. Some of it is, really trying to, again, get more of automation and shift some of the workforce and upskill some of the workforce. So there's a lot of different areas that need work. And frankly, we continue, the more we're better able to see ourselves in our organic industrial base, the more we see that we need to invest. So when I started as secretary, we had a 15-year plan for $15 billion. We still have a 15-year plan, but it's now $18 billion because I think we're better understanding the kinds of investments that we need to make.
Certainly, and we're far from out of the woods, but the plan is laid down, and I think we need to accelerate even more. Let me just shift a little bit to what we're witnessing in the Ukraine. When we look at the Abrams upgrade plan over the last few years, it has actually slowed down, yet we see it in the unfunded priorities list. And then ultimately, we as Congress have plussed that up to a rate of around 90 tanks a year. General McConville, walk us through what we've witnessed over the course of the last year in Ukraine, its impact on our armor, and particularly in tanks and what we've seen out there. Is that impacting any decisions on what we're doing with our Abrams and the upgrades?
Well, I think as it's interesting, we watched the battles unfold in Ukraine. Initially, they were very defensive, and you saw javelins being used very effectively and some logistics problems with the Russians. And some people said, hey, I guess we don't need armor anymore. Take a hard look at it. I argue the opposite. If you want to win, you do it with armor. And we're seeing that play out as we speak. And really the strategy within the Army is, we are modernizing our armor. We're doing that's an enduring system. The Abrams is, we've gone through the different models, and we continue to do that. As we give up armor to other countries, we're buying the brand new capabilities. We're also seeing our allies and partners buy. Poland has bought a whole bunch of Abrams tanks. They certainly understand the importance of having mobile protected firepower. But even within our portfolio, we're building mobile protected fires. We're building the AMP-V. We're building the capabilities we need so we can conduct combined arms operations, and that's where we're going in the future. We don't have all the resources we need, so we make tough decisions on we got to modernize, and we have to do the enduring programs, and they may have to slow down depending on the resources we get.
I thank you. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Chair now recognizes Dr. Desjardins of Tennessee for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Secretary Wormuth, you've stated that recruiting shortfalls is the most important issue for the United States Army. And while I'm glad to hear your commitment to not lowering standards, I do want to ask you what you think the reasons are for the apathy in our young population when it comes to serving in the military. And I just wanted to cite a Wall Street Journal poll that I had entered into one of our last hearings that showed that patriotism has dropped in the young population from about 25 years ago of 70% consider themselves very patriotic to about 38% today. So with that, what's your explanation as far as why we're seeing this apathy?
Congressman, I saw that poll as well, and frankly, I was really disturbed by it. I consider myself a patriotic person, and I think young people should be proud of this country. So I was disturbed to see such a dramatic drop in patriotism. I think there are a lot of different reasons why young people aren't as interested in service today as they used to be. I think some of it is just a lot of young Americans don't know very much at all about the Army. After the 9/11 attacks, we went into our bases for obvious security reasons that were appropriate, but I think young people didn't see as much of us anymore. As I said, we've done polling that shows that young people sometimes are afraid that the Army will put their life on hold in some way, and I think we're really trying to challenge that misperception and show just how many opportunities the Army offers. Some of it is kids are, a little afraid about leaving their families. So I think there's a lot. The fact that we weren't in high schools for a couple of years during the pandemic didn't help us.
Okay. Yeah, you compare the current predicament to the general attitude around 9/11 when people were very patriotic and lined up around the block to serve. There certainly seems to be a little apathy in that regard now. Do you think it's possible that the lack of clarity in our policy could be driving some of that? I think as far as what the outcome may be in Ukraine, what our goals, what our objectives are, the looming conflict with China and Taiwan, there doesn't seem to be clarity and frankly a lot of ambiguity from the administration on what our objectives are. So do you think that more clarification in what the goal of the Army and the military in general is coming from the Commander-in-Chief would be helpful in recruiting?
Congressman, I think the administration's been very clear about what its objectives are in terms of supporting Ukraine or in terms of the competition with China. But I also always think it's helpful to talk to the American public about why national security matters and that, the job of the United States Army is to protect this country and to fight and win the nation's wars. And I think helping people understand that this is the most dangerous national security environment in the last 30 years is very important.
Okay. Well, I appreciate your optimism that you think that they've made it very clear, but we have probably a different opinion from a lot of our constituents back home, and I know I'm not alone on this committee from both sides of the aisle. There seems to be a lack of clarity, so I think there's definitely room for improvement in terms of what our mission is. Certainly, there's ambiguity when it comes to China and Taiwan. President Biden says on 3 occasions we'll be there, only to have the White House walk that back. In Ukraine, we see billions of dollars going over, but we don't see a clear endpoint. So even though your opinion, and maybe in here where we get a lot more information, it seems clear, but to the general public, I don't think that's the case. So I definitely think we need a better job of clarifying it. General McConville, what effect would further reduction in the active duty Army have on the Army's ability to execute its position of the National Defense Strategy?
Well, first of all, I think, the Army we have right now is we need to continue to grow this Army we have. If you take a look at what our troops are doing, their deployment to dwell ratio is very significant. We live in a very dangerous world, and you can't create an Army overnight, so we need to be very aggressive on the recruiting. And my thoughts from where I sit is 83% of the young men and women that come into the Army come from military families. So we are a military family business. We need to be an American family business. And the second one is 44% come from high schools that have ROTC, and they're only in 10% of the high schools. And so we need to do a better job. I'm going to stay out of the politics, but we need to do a better job exposing what our Army's about. And we put some of these great young Americans serving in uniform. They go back to their high schools, and they show how much they've grown. I think we can really have a much better effect on that.
I thank you both for your time. I yield.
Chair, now recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Carbajal, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Secretary Wormuth, for being here, and General McConville. Thank you for your service, for your long time service to our country. Certainly we're better for it, so I congratulate you on your retirement coming up. I want to start by focusing on the recruiting challenges that the Department and the Army have faced today. Secretary Wormuth, you mentioned in your testimony that we're experiencing the most challenging recruiting landscape in a generation. making retention that much more important. What can Congress do to help you in your efforts for recruiting and retention?
Thank you, Congressman. Retention is incredibly important at this time. I mean, it's always important, but it's particularly important when we're facing the difficult recruiting landscape we have. And I'm happy to report that we are retaining extraordinarily well right now at over 104%. And I think that speaks to, frankly, how soldiers, when they join the Army, are more often than not happy to stay in the Army. And I think that's because they feel a sense of purpose, that what they're doing matters, they're getting great training opportunities. So retention for us is good. Part of that is, we're able to offer retention bonuses, so certainly we appreciate congressional support for that. And I think in terms of other things Congress can do to help us, I think the department will be coming forward probably with some legislative proposals looking at how we can get better access, for example, to college dropout lists, for example. That's a potential pool of high-quality recruits for us, but we don't always get that information from colleges in a timely way. So you all supporting some of the legislative proposals that come over would be very, very helpful.
Great. As we work to increase recruitment for our military, I want to applaud the department for increasing the numbers of underrepresented minority groups. However, in fiscal year 22, the Hispanic community, for example, represented 17.6% of the Army. That's up 5.6% over the last 10 years. However, my concern is that those numbers don't translate to the senior officer ranks. In the same year, the Hispanic community represented 9% of the Army's officer corps, but only 4% of the ranks 0 to 6. What is the Army doing to ensure greater representation of the underrepresented groups in the senior ranks?
Thank you, Congressman, for that question. The Chief and I have talked about that very thing, and we do need to do better, frankly, in terms of making sure that our Hispanic American officers, for example, have opportunities that they need to develop professionally so that they're competitive for those more senior roles. You're absolutely right that we don't have, frankly, the same percentage that we would expect to see. Part of what we're trying to do to rectify that is to have better mentorship programs, for example. So we have some mentorship programs. The Cavazos program is one of them. But I think we need to do more to mentor our Hispanic American officers earlier in their career so that they, again, are getting the kind of leader development that they need. And our BCAP and CCAP assessment programs, I think, are also going to be helpful in that regard. I don't know, Chief, if you want to add.
No, I think we want to give everyone an opportunity to rise to the highest levels, and we have to coach and mentor to do that. We got to make sure that the best and brightest, we keep them in the Army. We're in a war for talent, and it starts not at the colonel level looking at how many generals you have. You really have to go back into the force, get the right people to go to the best universities, whether it's West Point or other places, and then make sure as they come up through the ranks, we are competing for their talents, giving them the experience they need, so when they come to the level, they are ready to assume that. And we are seeing that within the next commander of the 101st Airborne Division is going to be an Hispanic officer.
The one point I would remind you is that there's a tendency, a natural tendency, for those that are in a position to promote, unless they reflect those that they are in front of them, sometimes those biases have an impact. So I encourage you to look at those promotional panels to make sure that they're representative of those that are before them as well. As the war in Ukraine continues, we're sending some of our stockpile of munitions to assist their efforts to defend against Russia. General McConville, what processes are in place to ensure we're maintaining enough supplies needed to defend ourselves? And do we have a set number?
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And first of all, General McConville, I just want to thank you for your service. And I want to highlight, I mean, the BCAP program, that's your baby. And I got to work with you when you were the deputy G1 and G1 and vice chief. And I would just say some of the accomplishments you've done over the last 7 or 8 years have been tremendous and not only impact our Army of today, but they impact the Army of the future. And I want to thank you for that because I don't think you'll ever get enough credit for that. That being said, what can we do better? You're a personnel guy, and I know you're also a combat warrior, but you're a personnel guy at heart, and you know about soldiers, and you care about soldiers and their families. What things can we do better that help us with our families, the EFMPs, all those things that make it better quality for the family so that we can retain and recruit soldiers so that's where they want to be. They know it's home.
Yeah, thank you, Congressman. And as you know very well from your experience, is the Army is people, and quite frankly, that's why when we talk about people first, they're our most important weapons system, if you will, and we enlist soldiers, but we retain families. And so as as we talk about continuing resolutions, we don't need a continuing resolution. We need to get the resources that you've given to us. We need to get it in the hands of our families so they can build the right housing. They can build, and when you think about it, what do our families want? Quality of life. They want good housing. They want good health care. They want child development centers. They want an opportunity for their spouses to have employment. And we almost fixed this, but they want to have good moves. They don't lose all their stuff when they go from place to place. And so those investments really matter.
And I just ask that we continue to invest. And Secretary, we had a great talk yesterday, but we've got to invest in making sure we have transfer of professional certificates across states for our Army spouses. We have to make sure that we look at a retirement for those, and I've recommended TSP as for spouses that are separate from their others that they can invest in, and it is portable between states and employees and jobs. I think that's great opportunities. I just think there's a ton of things. I want to talk a little bit about resourcing because as a battalion commander, I thought I'd care about his operations, and I cared little about operations. I cared about personnel and equipment because if you don't have those two things, you're not there. So we've got the Army Futures Command, and we're talking about the new systems that we're going to bring on. So are we going to relook based on the capabilities of these systems, how we form? I think we have too little artillery in today's world as opposed to the 80s when I first was entered into. So are we going to relook how we form our brigades, divisions, whatever those fighting units are, and what those capabilities? Do we have more artillery, more long-range precision fires, more or less aviation, more heavy armor? And I agree with you. Just because the Russians failed to use armor right and have inferior tanks doesn't mean that armor is out of business. Trust me, if Desert Storm and the initial invasion of Iraq show that armor works and is necessary. If you can comment on that, General McConville or Secretary.
Sure, Congressman. I would say we absolutely are looking at all of those things. First of all, Army Futures Command with General Jim Rainey, and particularly as he looks out at the Army of 2040, is really looking at, our formations. What do they need to look like with these new capabilities? How should we be thinking about autonomy and artificial intelligence, for example? But kind of closer in the windshield, we use our total Army analysis process to basically help us redesign. And we're putting a lot of emphasis on our joint forcible entry divisions as well as our armored strike divisions.
And I'm sorry, but I have one more question, and I've got to get to it. General McConville and Secretary, over the last 25 years in Iraq, we have turned the Guard and Reserve from a strategic reserve into an operational reserve. But I'm seeing the same things now that happened in the 70s and 80s. I'm seeing the mentality of saying, well, give them second-class equipment or give them the older version of the new equipment. Don't field them on the same rate that we do our active component. And I can tell you, we cannot fight a war with China or Russia or Iran or Korea without those guys and girls deploying tonight. So I'm asking you, will you guys commit not to make the National Guard and Reserve second-class citizens when it comes to fielding of equipment? Because if you do, they will perform at the level of your expectations of them.
Yes, Congressman, I'm a full supporter of the total Army.
Yeah, I just want to say something about what a great job our Guard and Reserve doing. As you said, Congressman, for the last 25 years, they have been incredibly impressive. They are doing a great job away and at home, and we're just very, very proud of our National Guard and Reserves, and they will get the equipment they need to do the job.
I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman. Chair, and I recognize the gentlelady from Pennsylvania, Ms. Houlihan, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much for your testimony and for your service. I had questions about supply chains, but I'm instead going to pivot to some of the questions that have come up since about retention and recruitment. I was an ROTC scholar recipient in the 1980s, and my class of 40 ended up graduating 4. And of the 4 that graduated, half of them had military families in their background. I was one of them, and I was the only woman. Of the program that I was a participant of, I was able to receive full tuition and room and board and and books as part of my deal at Stanford University. Since then, in the last 30 years, that program has been enormously watered down to the point where the tuition reimbursement is only about a sixth of what education at a place like Stanford would be. And so, General, you were talking about wanting to make sure we could get the best and the brightest, and we wanted to make sure that we were able to find people whose families weren't necessarily from that West Point background or West Point heritage. I feel as though we've lost the thread on our ROTC programs because we've created sort of what seems to be a program and a process to get more rather than better. And I'm wondering if you have seen that and reflect on that, and is there something that we can be doing to, especially in a world where college debt is a real issue and where kids are making choices based on kind of where they're going to come out of this with how much debt, is there something that we should be doing to perhaps return to a program and a process that allows people to emerge debt-free?
Yeah, I need to check on that, Congressman, because two of my sons went to went to Boston College and Boston University. They went on ROTC scholarships, and quite frankly, the military did a very good job of really covering almost all of that, and even those universities kicked in to help those type of things. So we'll come back to you, and if we're not, because we want young men and women to go to Stanford, we want them to go to Harvard, we want them to go to our top schools, we want to give everyone an opportunity to serve, and if we have something missing, that we need to look into that, because that's not what I believe. And West Point is kind of the core where we get 1,000 great young men and women out of there every year, but ROTC actually produces the most officers. That's a very important program, and we got to make sure we're funding it to do precisely what you said.
I'd absolutely love to look at that with you, because the feedback I've gotten, and I also have children of probably about your children's age, has been that this has been a discouragement from people pursuing opportunities like ROTC over other scholarship opportunities. My next question has to do with military spouses. I grew up in a military family, and my mom moved every year, and every year hit reset. In fact, when I went off to school, to college, she was able to finally go back and pursue a graduate degree in GIS and remote sensing. So she's a smart lady. Is there something that we can be doing, not just for making sure that people who are in career fields that need certificates and transfers can be happening, but also who are in career fields, for instance, that are financial or high tech, can also pursue their careers? Meaning, can they stay a little bit longer in their service stations or their duty stations? Is there anything we can be doing to address that kind of a spouse?
I think, Congresswoman, we need to be looking at the very good point you're raising about sort of longer assignments. This is something I've heard from a number of different places. I think it would have benefits for spouses. It would also, I think, have benefits for soldiers and just families generally. That's not how the Army has done things, and we have slowly been lengthening, assignment times from 2 years to 3 years and a little longer. But we probably need to look at that for a number of reasons. The other thing I would say, where we could use your help is there is now, thanks to Congress, a federal law that says, all professional licenses are transferable across all states. But I think working with the states to get that actually implemented, that's part of the challenge. I don't think the state legislatures and governors are all aware that you all actually passed a law making all those licenses portable nationwide.
If I could just add, I think this is really important on our spouses, and we see many professional spouses in the military now in all ranks, and I've watched my wife move 23 times, who was a professional, trying to do the whole license bit and all those type things. We've gotten better, but we need to get a lot better. But we're going to have to compete. We're going to have to compete for these couples, and that's why the talent management system we've gone to is we really had to fundamentally change it. We cannot be an industrial age personnel management system and treat everyone the same. You got to bring the whole family along if you want them to serve. Or they'll go
100%.
someplace else.
I appreciate you guys. I yield back. Thank you.
Chair, I recognize the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Gallagher, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. General McConville, how soon will we see an indirect fire protection capability fielded in an operationally meaningful number?
Well, as you probably know, Con, we have Iron Dome, which is fielded, which is an indirect fire, but that's not where we want to be.
Yeah.
We want to improve that. We have what we call an integrated battle command system, which is the ability to take multiple sensors to combine that, and that's where we're going with it. Really, the future air and missile defense is multiple sensors, multiple shooters, tying them together so you're not shooting Patriot missiles at $100,000 unmanned aerial system.
I get the concern is particularly thinking about Guam and Misawa, how far away are we? It seems to me that IFPC, it's like, the Chicago Bears of systems. It's always like 2 years away from being 2 years away. I could have done a Boston team, by the way. I didn't do that. I respect
Thanks.
it. And you guys win.
You hit that. That would be getting really close to home there, Congressman. Go ahead.
Yeah. But I mean, what's the timeline?
Your point.
Why not buy NASAMS if it's good enough for DC?
As you've probably seen, the integrated battle command system has been going on many years. It's fine. We are fielding it right now, so that's coming into play, which is kind of the brain that's going to allow us to have, tie together so you don't have one radar for one missile system. If you want to take advantage of the different sensors, you've got to have a system that's open architecture that allows you to bring that together. And really, when you take a look at places like Guam and those type of things, it's bringing together THAAD, it's bringing together Aegis, it's bringing together Patriot. You're going to have smaller systems. You're going to have unmanned aerial systems. You're going to have to deal with swarms. And so those are the capabilities we're bringing. And quite frankly, I see them sooner than later. I'm talking the next couple of years, like really soon. So.
Okay. Secretary Wormuth, among the many lessons learned from, I think, our inability to deter a war in Ukraine and the subsequent conflict there, it seems to be that in modern war, conventional war, even conventional war, where you sprinkle on sort of asymmetric aspects, you burn through a lot of munitions very, very quickly, and we're just burning through a ton. I mean, how concerned are you about our stockpiles of key munition systems at present in light of what we've seen in Ukraine?
Well, Congressman, I think, I would like our industrial base to be more robust than it is today. But as I've said a couple of times this morning, we are investing $1.5 billion in our organic industrial base to increase our capacity, to increase the speed of production. We have taken the money you all in Congress have given us and gotten it on contract very quickly with our partners like Lockheed Martin, like Raytheon, to get them to be able to ramp up their production. I think the combination of expanding our own organic industrial base, getting our partners in industry to ramp up quickly, and frankly, pushing our European partners to increase their production and their industrial base, and working with allies and partners to make contributions, I think we can continue to provide assistance and replenish.
Specifically about our stockpiles, and same question for you, General McConville. Are you sort of concerned about the state of our stockpiles of key munitions?
Well, go ahead.
Go ahead, Secretary. Yeah, I'm always concerned about our stockpiles. I think, we went through about 22 years of combat in Iraq and Afghanistan, and we were basically building about 14,000 rounds of 155 a month, and that was more than sufficient. If you take a look at some of our other stockpiles like Stingers, and, we haven't built a Stinger in a year, and we didn't need to. And so, I look back at when General Marshall had my job, he said, when I had the time, I didn't have the money. Then when I got the money, I didn't have the time. I think that's what we need to be careful. We need to get ahead of this thing. We know where we're at right now. We need to, to me, it's not about supply chains, it's about supply networks. We don't want to be one-option commanders. We don't want to have one capability. We need to invest in that, and we have to be innovative in how we get ahead of long lead item times, because you don't want a whole bunch of ammunition sitting in warehouses either.
Yeah. And I don't know if you wanted to finish your thought.
I would just add, maybe, Congressman, that I think the multi-year procurement authority is very, very helpful in terms of getting industry to have confidence that that demand signal is going to be there.
Authority is important. As authorizers, we obviously share that view. Appropriation would be even better. And if you talk to all the companies that you mentioned, I think they would say that multi-year appropriation in meaningful scale for critical munition systems, particularly long-range anti-ship missiles, JASSM, SM-6 is absolutely essential going forward. With that, I have 15 seconds, so I can't ask another question. I yield back.
Yeah, I do want to follow up on that, General McConville. You said you don't want to have a bunch of munitions sitting around in storage. Isn't that what a stockpile is?
Well, what I mean by that is you don't want to have excess. I'll clarify that. What you don't want to do with you find with ammunition is have ammunition you don't need. You spend a lot of money on it, and then you spend a lot of money doing what we call a service life extension program, or you do what we call demilitarize that ammunition. So you want to be smart on how you want to do it. And like some of the systems, you may just want to buy the long lead items because, we talk about missiles. It's going to take us 2 years to get this. Why? Because this component takes 2 years to get it. So we may want to be innovative and buy that component and maybe have that sitting in a warehouse. And then the other things that we can make very, very quickly, we can turn in 3 months. So you just took your time to make that missile to 3 months. And that gives you, it's all about risk management. How long can you wait before you need that system? I think we need to think about doing it differently.
All right, thank you. Chair, and I recognize the gentlelady from New Jersey, Ms. Sherrill, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Secretary Wormuth and General McConville, it's really good to see you both again, and thank you so much for your service to our country and for keeping our troops safe. Over the past 2 decades, our military has been focused on counterinsurgency operations, and as we prepare to transition to a potentially contested logistics combat environment against near-peer adversaries, how is the Army addressing our supply chain issues, specifically on critical minerals, which are mostly mined and processed by our strategic competitors?
Congresswoman, I think the pandemic highlighted to all of us the fragility of our supply chains, and we've all become, I think, much more aware of how reliant we are on certain foreign sources for different things like critical minerals. So we're working with our partners in OSD to basically try to identify, where we have vulnerabilities, where we can find additional sources. That is something that we're going to have to, I think, work together on with the department to make sure that we find additional sources that we have much more confidence in, for example.
Thank you. And I know the last briefing I had at Picatinny Arsenal, I know they're hard at work on tracing much of that. And as we work to onshore, nearshore, and friendshore our supply chain for critical minerals, we're also going to have to come up with viable chemical solutions, not only to potentially provide the raw materials, but to process the minerals we procure. As the Army moves forward with that critical effort, our scientists and engineers are working out of, in many cases, World War II-era facilities. Can you describe the Army's plan to recapitalize our S&T infrastructure and why new lab facilities are so important for our lethality enhancement efforts?
Yes, Congresswoman. Just as you said, our labs are critical to our ability to produce a wide range of systems, munitions, and critical components. We have a 15-year plan to reinvest in our organic industrial base and our labs. And the resources that we've estimated to go into that 15-year plan have actually increased since I've been secretary. We're now looking at about $18 billion to reinvest in a lot of that infrastructure, which, as you pointed out, much of it is very, very dated. So, given the resources we have, we're not going to be able to do all of that work in the next couple of years, but we do have a plan because we need to recapitalize those labs to make sure that we have the workforce that can supply us with the components that we need.
That's great news, because I know as we try to modernize our Army, getting some of the top-level scientists and being able to recruit them to world-class laboratories will be very important. And as we recapitalize our facilities, it will, of course, be important to fully utilize them as the Army moves to outpace China, and as the war in Ukraine proves, our munitions need to have extended range and increased lethality. So, Secretary Wormuth, can you speak to the Army's specific expertise in developing next-gen propellants and explosives, and speak to a few efforts that could benefit from increased congressional support?
Well, Congresswoman, we have a robust long-range precision fires program, for example. I know that you're familiar with that, and propellants are obviously a key piece of that. Things like our long-range hypersonic weapon, for example, is going to need new and different kinds of technologies for it to be successful. So I think, we're always looking at how we can do a better job of making sure that we've got the kind of skilled workforce that we need. And we've really built into our modernization plan looking at, what kinds of capabilities do we need in our labs, for example, or do we need to have with our defense industry partners to be able to successfully produce those new systems.
Thank you. And then switching gears just a little bit, how's the Army working to address resiliency and sustainability requirements? I know that clean fuel usage will impact the Army's logistics capabilities and overall lethality and survivability for equipment and personnel. Can you speak a little to the movements in those areas?
Sure. We have put out a climate strategy, and though I think of it as kind of really focused on two big areas of investment. Part of that is looking at the resiliency of our installations, so that they can be hardened against extreme weather so that our soldiers can continue to train. So that's where you see things like microgrids, for example. We're also investing in making our non-tactical vehicles, for example, fully electric by 2037. And that's going to have, fuel efficiency benefits. It's going to have greenhouse gas emission reduction benefits. But we're also looking at, some hybrid vehicles that may actually be quieter, more fuel efficient.
Gentlelady's time's expired. Chair, I recognize the gentleman from
resource-intensive
Florida,
on
Mr.
convoy.
Waltz, for 5 minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to pick up on that climate strategy, Madam Secretary. And the FY23 NDAA required the department to provide Congress with a cost-benefit analysis before you go to any indefinite orders on EVs. And certainly before we go to tactical, I find it incredible that we're laying out in a long-term strategy to go to electric tanks and fighting vehicles. I haven't seen any charging stations in Ukraine or Africa or anywhere else. My concern is, as my colleagues mentioned, we don't control the supply chain. Do we control the lithium, the cobalt, the manganese that would go into an EV fleet?
No, Congressman, we don't, and I share your concerns about that.
So would you agree then that we should certify that to this committee, to the Congress, that we have control, and not only have control of it, that our greatest adversary that we're gearing up to defend against and hopefully deter doesn't also control that same supply chain?
I think we do need to work to get control of our supply chain so that the critical components we have, we control.
100% agree, and we'll be looking to insert that certification language into future legislation so that we don't go too far down that road and find out that it's too big to fail and we have no control over the supply chain that would go into our tanks, non-tactical vehicles, tactical vehicles, what have you. In that same vein, along with the climate strategy, you recently unveiled a solar panel microgrid at Fort Bragg, not microgrid, but a panel at Muddy Lake at Fort Bragg. Did the manufacturer certify that those panels were made in America?
I don't know the answer to that, Congressman.
Shouldn't you? Yeah, okay,
I
it's
believe
in accordance
China
with the
makes
law.
a lot of solar panels.
Can you confirm that the solar panels were not made in China, or that as we go to base resiliency, that they're not made in China in accordance with the FY23 NDAA?
I believe many solar panels are made in China.
Actually, the largest solar panel factory in the world is in Western China, ironically powered by coal. So as we're patting ourselves on the back for going to a zero-carbon army by 2030, it's actually being powered by slave labor, our greatest adversary, and coal, Russian coal, in Chinese plants. Do you find that problematic?
I think there are a lot of interdependencies that are challenging that we have to work through, yes.
Okay, so for the record, you don't know if that grid or any other grid is made in America or not made in China?
I would imagine, given that most solar panels are made in China, there's a good chance that those panels were made in China.
I find that's just jaw-dropping, that we are driving our it's one thing for the country, but to drive our military into greater dependency on our greatest adversary to power our bases, much less our fighting vehicles in the future, to be a huge problem. And I just find it astounding that you're testifying for this committee that you don't know.
Congressman, I said that I think since most panels are made in China, they're probably made in China.
Let's shift to the recruiting challenges. Are you on track to hit your number this year?
We are doing better than we were last year, but
are you going to hit the number? I mean, are you going to hit your recruiting goal?
65,000 was a very ambitious goal.
Because we had to make up for 25,000 short last year, the 10 that you lowered to 15.
Because the chief and I felt it was important to send a signal to our recruiter force that they shouldn't take their pedal off the metal.
Madam Secretary, are you going to make your number this year? Are we going to fall short again?
I think it's going to be a challenge, but we've still got the summer, which are traditionally our best recruiting months. But I think it's going to be a challenge.
Are you going to then have to subsequently cut force structure? Are we going to be having a conversation this summer about cutting force structure in the Army as we face unprecedented threats around the world?
Well, Congressman, we were already going to be making some structure changes because we're transforming from a CT-focused Army to a near-peer major warfight Army. But certainly if we don't turn our recruiting situation
Are you
around,
arguing then that a CT-focused Army needs to be bigger than a great power?
No, Congressman, I'm suggesting that the kinds of structure we need for the Army of 2030 is different than what we needed in the last 20 years. And if we don't turn our recruiting situation around, I am concerned that we may have to make cuts to force structure.
I think you're going to have to, and
well,
that is...
we don't want to be a hollow Army, certainly.
Right. General, I agree with you. Junior ROTC can be a real game changer. Mr. Chairman, I'll be introducing legislation to expand junior ROTC to help with this recruiting crisis. Thank you, and I yield.
It's a great idea. Chair now recognizes another great member from New Jersey, Mr. Kim, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the two of you for coming out here today. I wanted to just talk to you about something I was hearing about last time I was at the base in my district. You know, April being a month of the military child, and we were there talking about the challenges that military families are having. We're still having, real significant problems when it comes to military families and childcare. And I guess I just wanted to kind of get a sense from you. I know you mentioned it earlier, but just how are we doing on this front? You know, what is your assessment in terms of our grade level in terms of handling childcare, Secretary Wormuth?
Thanks, Congressman. We are continuing to try to invest in childcare. You know, I hear about that anytime I go to visit a camp poster station. It's critically important to our soldiers and their families. You know, we've built a number of new child development centers in the past few years. We've got 10 CDCs and child youth services that are going to be built in the future years. This year, we're really focused on trying to increase the staffing at our CDCs. You know, if we're operating at 100% staffing, we can bring more children in off the wait list.
And I saw that you've made investments into being able to increase some of the entry-level salaries and other types of benefits to be able to grow that workforce. As you say, we're not firing on all cylinders right now in terms of, our capacity to be able to do that. Have you seen these types of steps be able to increase that workforce? Are you getting a good response from these initial steps?
Yes, it's definitely helping. We also have recruiting bonuses, for example. We also have creative things like, a new CDC worker, if they have a child, we'll give them a 50% discount. We've let new staff get commissary privileges, for example. So that's helping. One of the things that's a challenge, frankly, is it takes a long time to bring on board our CDC workers because of the background checks and such.
I don't know if you know offhand. Do you know offhand what the wait list is on the Army side in terms of military families seeking child care?
I know that the average wait list time is about 119 days.
Do you know how many families are on that wait list?
I don't know off the top of my head.
If you don't mind, maybe follow up, because I was told that before that we were talking about upwards of 20,000 plus military families, I think across the DoD, but perhaps I'm wrong on that front. So I'd just like to make sure that I have the latest numbers on that front.
Sure, we'll get that for you.
Just to kind of switch gears a little bit, I know that you've been working hard, and we've been seeing a Pentagon-wide effort when it comes to suicide in the military. I believe that the Army has seen some decreases, at least in terms of Army components, in terms of suicide more recently. But I guess I just kind of wanted to get a sense from you all, in terms of the initiatives that you're pushing, are you seeing certain ones being more effective? Are there lessons learned that you understand already? And I know from the broader Pentagon efforts and what they've looked into this, are there any recommendations from some of those efforts that you're looking to now invest in the Army?
Well, Congressman, we're doing a lot in this area, and I would say, we did have a better year last year in terms of suicide rates going down. I will tell you, I'm concerned this year, particularly in the active component, we are seeing our numbers tick up a little bit, and that is concerning. So we're really trying to focus on which installations are we seeing those suicide rates go up, but also importantly, looking at the installations where we've seen the numbers go down, to look at those installations to say, what are they doing that actually maybe we should export to other camps, posts, and stations? We have seen the behavioral health resources that we surged, for example, to Alaska. That has been very, very effective.
Yeah.
And it's not just about behavioral health specialists. It can also be military family life counselors, chaplains. You know, the sort of full menu of resources, I think, makes a difference. I think what we're finding is it's about connections, and it's not a one-size-fits-all program. You know, one division may need a different set of resources than another division.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. I'd like to make sure you have as many tools in your toolbox to be able to address it. And I like that you're trying to be hyper-targeted about, you know, what installations, also what types of professions within Army, you know, if there's any sort of prevalence there. And you're right, you know, while it was encouraging that the numbers were not as significant the other year, but we all know that one data point is not enough for us to know that we've turned any corner or that it's any trend. But, you know, both of these issues, I raise these because, you know, they're not just issues that are there about helping our military families and our service members, which should be at our top priority, but there are also issues that are related to our readiness, and there are also issues related to our recruitment. The stronger that we can show that we are being responsive, that DOD is a good employer and a great employer at that, you know, the more we'll be able to push forward and address some of these broader issues. So with that, I'll yield back the balance of my time. Thank you.
Completely agree.
I will note that a new generation of leadership has occupied the top row and recognize Mr. Bacon.
Thank you, Mr. Gallagher. Appreciate you both being here. Grateful. I'm sorry, my question may have been asked, but we've had simultaneous hearings today, so we're trying to juggle a little bit. I don't want to repeat what Mr. Welch said on the recruiting questions, because I was going to ask the same thing, but I want to dig a little deeper. When I go around the district, which is around Omaha, Nebraska, I hear reluctance to join the military right now for a variety of reasons. So get into the recruiting and retention issues. One of them is quality of life, which I got some follow-on questions. We're going to lead a panel on this starting in June, trying to make improvements to quality of life. I've heard some voice concerns, like after Afghanistan, some of how we pulled out, that has been an inhibitor. I hear from some multi-generation families that served in the military where their kids would be more apt to join, a reluctance to let them join, because there's a perception in the administration that they're more about social issues versus warfighting. And these are the families you would recruit from primarily. And I've also heard from some that the private sector, with offering college education like at Starbucks and Walmart, sort of undermines our tools. Am I missing something, or is there more to it than this? Or I just get curious for your feedback, because this is what I'm seeing on the ground.
Congressman, thanks for that. I think, you know, many of the things that you raised are things that we've heard as well. I mean, certainly quality of life is a big issue. You know, that's why we're spending $1 billion a year on barracks, because, you know, I've seen some of our barracks, frankly, that I wouldn't want my daughters to live in. So we're really trying to get after that. I want parents to know that their kids are going to come and have good accommodations. You know, I do think when I go and visit our soldiers, whether it's here in the States or overseas, what I see is them focused on warfighting. You know, we are a ready Army. We got an entire brigade combat team from Fort Stewart to Germany and doing live fire training in 1 week. That's a ready Army. That's what I see our soldiers focused on. But some of the concerns that, you know, you've highlighted are ones that I've heard. You know, I think the chief and I try to emphasize everywhere we go that our Army has to be apolitical. You know, our soldiers swear an oath to the Constitution, not to a particular president or a political party. And I think there are a lot of people who have questions about that on both sides of the aisle. So we really need to hammer that home.
I appreciate your feedback on it, and I agree with you. And it's a perception. Perception is not always reality, but it's reality to those who may see it on cable news or reading the internet. And I just think we got to keep reminding folks we serve the greatest country in the world. We have the greatest Army in the world. We have the greatest military that will kick anybody's butt. And that's what people want to join and be a part of. They want to be part of the best. But I think it's getting lost amongst all the differing messages that are out there. If I may ask General McConville, if you had to prioritize quality of life measures that we need to take, what do you see?
Yeah, I think, you know, when it comes to quality of life, probably the most important thing is housing, is a number one quality of life. And I, you know, we talked about, you know, at least have talked about this, is I worry the most about young soldiers with families that quite frankly can't get on post housing. Only like 35% of our families actually live on post. And so if they're off post and they're, you know, a specialist and they've got 2 or 3 kids, The compensation is not that good, and even the way we do the housing allowance is not that good. So I just worry about those young.
Let me follow on that. We've cut housing allowance by 5%, which obviously affects those who live off base, but even affects those on base because that housing allowance goes to the private owners of those homes. I think we got to reinstate that 5%. I mean, you have any feedback on that?
No, I think I don't. I think we need to. If we're in a war for talent, and we want these qualified soldiers and families to stay, and like we like to say, we enlist soldiers, but we retain families, and so we have to compete for them. And it's a very competitive market out there right now.
You're absolutely right. I moved 16 times, and when my spouse decided she was done, it was hard to keep going. So I totally get you there. We have anecdotal evidence of soldiers being on SNAP and food stamps. Do you have much evidence of that? Because we want to dig into that and see if we can adjust the pay to fix that.
Congressman, I would say, we certainly hear about food insecurity. I think RAND did a study recently, and that would be important to look at. And we're not always entirely clear about what's at play. One thing we really try to emphasize is financial literacy for our soldiers, but I do think we need to relook our compensation, and the department is going to do the quadrennial military compensation review starting very soon, and that will help us, I think, look at that.
Starting in June, the panel that we're standing up, we're going to be tackling that too. So we look forward to getting your perspective and expertise on it. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you.
Ms. Escobar.
Thank you so much. And Madam Secretary and General, thank you very much for being here today. Thank you, of course, for your service. General McConville, you will be missed. Thank you for your incredible dedication over all these years. And Secretary Wormuth, I want to thank the Army especially for the great collaboration with my community, especially on Kastner Range. Incredible gift to the future, and it could not have happened without your leadership, so thank you very much. As you both know, I have the privilege of representing Fort Bliss, and want to say that I was absolutely thrilled to see $74 million in the President's budget for the rail yard at Fort Bliss, and additionally, it's been encouraging to find several key investments for Fort Bliss, the transient training barracks and a line haul facility included in the Future Years Defense Program. I have long advocated for all of those investments. Can you speak about the importance of these MilCon investments to support Fort Bliss mobilization and training mission requirements?
Certainly, Congresswoman. And first of all, I would say, we're very pleased about the Kastner Range situation. I think that's a win-win, and we look forward to being the custodian of that new national monument. In terms of the importance of the investments you cited, first of all, the rail yard is, going to be very important in terms of power projection, and we've got to always be looking at our power projection infrastructure and investing in that. And so that, this is going to be an important investment that goes towards making sure that we're able to push soldiers out of Fort Bliss. And then just as we were talking about, quality of life for our soldiers, the training barracks will be very important for that. We want our soldiers, when they come to Bliss to train, to be staying in good accommodations. So we're pleased that we're going to be able to invest in that in a couple of years.
Thank you so much. I also want to ask about, ask for an update on MSHORAD, the stationing timeline. Fort Bliss was identified as one of 6 potential stations for MSHORAD battalions, which could be fielded at up to 3 of those installations pending a programmatic environmental assessment. Could you provide information about the timeline for potential stationing at Fort Bliss?
Certainly, Congresswoman. We're using our total Army analysis process to basically look at things like where we're going to station the MSHORAD battalions, but also our multi-domain task forces, for example, and the IFPIC battalions. And I expect, we're looking at some of that work right now, and won't be making any decisions in the near term, but we'll probably be in a position to be able to come and talk to you and other members about where we are later this summer.
Okay, that'd be great. I'm very interested, obviously, not just in the timeline, but really hope that Fort Bliss is well positioned from that perspective. And then really actually want to take my last minute or so to mention that I want to echo some of what my colleague, Mr. Kim, mentioned in his remarks about not just service member suicide, but provisions for child care, child development centers, and making sure that we are providing those wraparound services for our families. One of the things that has been really alarming for me, especially at Fort Bliss, obviously is the suicides. And I know that we continue to work hard at providing the services and support that our service members need. At Fort Bliss, our commanding general actually is incredibly innovative. I'm so proud of his leadership, so happy that he is at our military installation. But he has really piloted, I think, something unique and something worthy of exploring at other installations as well in terms of those wraparound services, kind of making sure that our service members, trying to dig into what their challenges are so that they don't get to the brink. And I'm very hopeful that his approach will be successful, and if it is, I think it would be a model to use throughout the military. So, and with that, just thank you again for your service, and I yield back.
Mr. Ryan is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you both for being here. Thank you for your leadership in beating Navy this year. Very important and near and dear to my heart. On a more serious note, I really want to commend you both for many things, in particular your commitment to our people, and throughout your testimony today and written testimony, just emphasizing the priority on our most important resource amidst the programs and equipment. I'm really proud to now represent the preeminent leadership institution, I think, in the world at West Point, and know that you are both committed, and the Army is, to continuing to invest there. I want to just shine light on and commend the President's commitment of an additional $48.7 million in this year's budget to the USMA 2035 construction and capital projects to make sure that we can keep that institution physically up to at least the 20th century in terms of barracks and facilities. And I also want to commend President Biden included this year a provision in an executive order to ensure that that work is done using local union labor from our community in the Hudson Valley. So as we invest in our future military leaders, we're providing good paying union jobs in the Hudson Valley. And I just want to ensure that I know you're supportive of that, of course, but that we continue to support and work that as we go forward. Another critical project there is the Cybersecurity and Engineering Center. And so that leads into my actual question, which is just to hear from you both, both in terms of cybersecurity and training the future force and the present force on cyber, but across the board, how do you feel in terms of both the readiness and morale of our junior officers and cadets showing up, and where do you need more help, more resources to make sure we're prepared for all the contingencies across all domains, both for our officers, NCOs, and soldiers?
Well, I want to just agree with you completely about, the importance of West Point and the amazing cadets and officers that get produced out of there. It's really, really impressive. I think in terms of cybersecurity in particular, I would say, we're making huge investments in that. We're 3 years into moving to the cloud. We're spending $400 million on zero trust implementation. But we've got to be able to recruit the best and the brightest. And I think offering them opportunities in the cyber field, through things like our software factory or in positions at Army Cyber Command, for example, that's really important. And you can do things in the cyber field in the Army that you can't do anywhere else. And I think that's something we have to continue to emphasize. I don't know, Chief, if you want to add.
No, I think it's, as you may know, that, cyber is one of the top branches to go out first. So there's tremendous competition to get into the cyber force. We're getting the best and brightest to come in there. And as the Secretary said, what we have to do is keep them. How do we keep them in? How do we get their master's, doctorate? How do we give them purposeful work which we're seeing, and it's going to be so important on the future battlefield, protecting data, zero trust, all these type things that are going to give us the edge we're going to need to protect, or we'll go back to, World War II tactics.
And to the degree that you can come to us with sort of creative ideas on retention or ways to compensate, retain those kinds of unique skill sets that we all agree we desperately need, I think certainly I am open to hearing that and would love to work on that. Only a minute left, but I just wanted to follow up on the discussion on what potential recruits and future soldiers are focused on, what their concerns are. My colleague brought up essentially threats to their safety as the @1 concern. Can you talk and go a little bit deeper of what do we mean by that? Is this a result of seeing 20 years of conflict? What did the survey say really is below the surface there that we can try to address?
I think, Congressman, it is about sort of perceptions of what they've seen the Army doing in the last 20 years. So it's, things like PTSD, for example, that they're concerned about. And, that gets reinforced quite a bit through movies and things like that. And of course, there are real threats in the Army to one's physical safety. We're America's fighting force. And I think we have to emphasize all of the amazing opportunities that you know very well that are out there for young Americans.
General, anything to add there?
Yeah, I was just going to add that the idea about putting your life on hold, I felt the same way when I was 17 years old going to West Point. I was going to be 28 before I got out of the Army, and, I'm still
They got
around,
you.
So.
They got there.
Yeah.
Thank you, and I yield back.
Mr. Strong.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General, it's good to see you a few weeks ago and at Redstone Arsenal at AMC's Change of Command ceremony. It's great to see you there. I know neither of you play favorites, but I can. North Alabama is home to the best there is, Redstone Arsenal. I've enjoyed a close relationship with Arsenal leadership for years. I hope if I can ever be of assistance to the Army, you won't hesitate to call. You'll be hard-pressed to find a more pro-Army state than Alabama. General McConville, I understand the Army's plans to field 2 IBCS battalions per year, but your top unfunded priority included another system, 2 for the Indo-Pacific theater. Given the increased need for sophisticated air defense systems, do you believe this plan is truly sufficient to meet the need of the joint forces?
Well, Congressman, as you said, the air and missile defense is absolutely critical. The integrated battle command system, which is coming online, we think is extremely important because the edge it's going to give us is many of our air and missile defense systems are based on one radar for one system. And what we want to be able to do is take those multiple sensors, bring that information together, and then use the appropriate arrow, if you will, to deal with that sense. So, we need to move out as fast as we can develop these systems, and they're going to be very, very important for whatever fight we're in.
Thank you. How does the IBCS fit into the joint all-domain command and control?
I think it's a key and essential part of that as we develop a future system. We talked about Iron Dome. That was one of the concerns we had. How does that fit in? But the systems we're developing and the systems that we're working with our joint partners are all going to need to play with that because we're going to be able to use joint sensors. So if we can't use each other's radars and sensors, we won't get the advantage that we need.
Thank you. Secretary Wormuth, Section 1244 of last year's NDAA gave the Department of Defense the authority to utilize multi-year procurement to accelerate production efforts. There are proposals for multi-year procurements within the FY24 budget, but I noticed several critical munitions programs or Army programs in general were included as candidates. Do you support using multi-year procurement for the PAC-3 and other critical Army systems?
I do, Congressman. As General McConville said earlier, industry doesn't generally do the work out of enthusiasm. They like to see a continued demand signal, and that multi-year procurement authority sends them that signal. So we very much hope that Congress will give that to us for Patriot and GMLRS this year.
Thank you. Do you see a problem with the fact that there isn't an appropriations companion policy for the multi-year procurement?
Well, it would be helpful, I think, to have multi-year appropriations also.
Okay, I agree. What measures does the Army propose to support expanded production of critical munitions?
Well, one of the things we're doing, Congressman, is to invest $1.5 billion in our organic industrial base. That's going to help us expand our production capability. And then we're also trying to work very closely with industry, with our partners in industry, to get money on contract for them so that they can ramp up their production, both in terms of speed but also volume.
Thank you. General McConville, you've given the United States your entire life. You and your family have made countless sacrifices, and we thank you for that. With this being said, your last time before us, what is a message you would like to leave with Congress and the American people?
Well, what I would say is I could not be more proud than the soldiers I've had the privilege of serving with over the last 42 years plus. This is a great Army, and you know, very, very proud of those who've served, those who are serving now, and those who will serve.
Thank you, General. I yield back.
Chair, and I recognize the gentlelady from Hawaii, Ms. Takuda, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mahalo, General McConville, for your service. Thank you, Secretary Wormuth, for being here today. You know, last November, the Congressional Budget Office found that the U.S. Army garrison Hawaii was in far worse physical condition on average compared to other Army bases. Our Army facilities accounted for significantly higher amounts of deferred maintenance, renovation, and modernization costs than any other Army base. In total, those costs combined come to about $4 billion, as you know, for U.S. Army garrison Hawaii, which includes Schofield Barracks, which is in my district. Failing infrastructure has real harmful impacts on our local communities and honestly strain our military's relationships with the people of Hawaii. It's not just the negative environmental or public health impacts that we hear about, like water main breaks or unauthorized wastewater discharges. When military housing on base is undesirable for our service members and their families to live in, they may choose and do choose to live off base instead, taking homes off the market for local residents and far worsening the housing situation in our strapped communities right now. Secretary Wormuth, I'm grateful that you recently visited Hawaii and was able to see firsthand our infrastructure issues and problems. Could you please discuss some of the challenges that you did see, and how is the fiscal 24 Army budget going to be addressing some of these challenges? I do know that of the identified permanent party barrack requests, we were not part of that. I know we have seen improvements back in 22, but what can we expect to see in terms of investments prioritized going forward?
Certainly, Congresswoman, and it was very helpful for me when I went out in Hawaii recently to both, you know, I did a town hall with our soldiers and families and heard from them directly. I know that the Red Hill spill has had a tremendous impact on the folks out in Hawaii. And we basically have sent a couple of teams out recently to look at the infrastructure there in particular, with a real focus on not just the above-ground infrastructure, but the below-ground infrastructure, because we've got to look at our sewer lines, water lines, the power grid. And I think as the chief and I look to build the next year's budget, we are looking hard at how we can put more resources towards the infrastructure in Hawaii. I also saw barracks at Schofield, and some of the barracks I saw did not look too good. You know, we've got such a huge inventory of barracks across the country, you know, CONUS and in Hawaii and elsewhere. We just can't renovate all of them all at once. And so what we've tried to do is we have a plan basically that we started in 2021 that goes to 2030 that will have us investing $1 billion a year in barracks across active guard and reserve. And so while we're not getting to barracks this year, you know, we will be getting to barracks in Hawaii in the next couple of years. And we constantly evaluate with our commanders the state of those barracks, and we can make adjustments over time.
Thank you. And I would say to help guide us in those investments and prioritization of that infrastructure, I appreciate the below ground as well as the above ground infrastructure repairs needed. Is it possible for us to also do some kind of housing impact assessment that takes a look at a number of different factors? How much of the BAH is being used off base? Total number of service members and their families relative to move-in ready units that we've got available, just to determine really the scope and the scale of the Army's impact on our local housing inventory, so that we can then focus on prioritizing that infrastructure needed to then say, this is how much more we need to renovate or actually build up so that we can accommodate our service members versus, again, straining our local housing inventory, which is, we're on an island, so we really can't build out too much farther. Is there ability to do that kind of assessment?
I think we could certainly work with you all to do that kind of assessment. And we've also really pushed our colleagues in Office of Secretary of Defense to reopen BAH and how it's calculated, because I'm not confident exactly how we're calculating BAH is reflective of sort of the real-time housing costs that we see, not just in Hawaii, but frankly in other parts of the country.
Absolutely, and possibly to also have a discussion with us on that matter as well. We appreciate more being given to our service members. What we can say is that it also drives up housing costs and rental prices in Hawaii. So as we look towards the next subject, I did want to touch briefly on, which is our overall leases that are going to be coming up for renegotiation. As you are very averse, you know very well, they're set to expire in 2029. This is a whole of military type of discussion that we have to have in terms of impact on community, understanding we know our strategic importance and role in the Indo-Pacific, but things like impacts on housing always comes up in every single one of our communities. I'm running out of time, but I would like to have further questions about how the Army is approaching the lease renewals coming up in 2029. What's the next key deadline you're seeing prior to that, and how we're going to focus on constituent and community engagement as part of this renewal and prioritization process. But thank you very much for your service, and I look forward to continued discussions. I yield back, Chair.
Gentleman from Florida, Mr. Gates is recognized for 5 minutes.
When Secretary Austin was here, neither he nor General Milley could defend some of the bizarre DEI activities that were going on at Dodoa, and then promptly after my questioning, they shut down the DEI entity at Dodoa. And so maybe we can make similar progress today. Ms. Wormuth, do you acknowledge that some of the strange manifestations of this DEI embrace have put negative pressures on the Army's recruiting?
Congressman, I'm not sure exactly what specifically you're referring to, but when we've done
so
surveys...
if you could put that slide up on the screen, I'll give you one. I thought that might be where this was going. So this is a Vignette 8. It's an Army training, and it's regarding the use of showers. The vignette reads, a soldier transitioned from male to female, as indicated in DEERS. The soldier did not have sex reassignment surgery. The transgender service member is using the female showers and has expressed privacy concerns regarding the open bay shower configuration. Similarly, other soldiers have expressed discomfort showering with a female who has male genitalia. And then if you look over at subpart 3 regarding the considerations, it just says, all soldiers will use the billeting, bathroom, and shower facilities associated with their gender marker in DEERS. What's your reaction to that?
My reaction, Congressman, is we're focused on building cohesive teams that are trained, disciplined, and fit.
Well, General McConville, I'll give you the next chance. Do you think that it builds cohesive teams to have biological males showering with women?
I think we need to respect the privacy of our soldiers and have an environment where everyone can thrive.
Well, of course, but that's not an answer to my question.
Well, that's the...
You and I spent a good amount of productive time yesterday talking about cohesive team building.
We did.
Does this advance cohesive team building, in your best military opinion?
Well, I think the fact we're talking about this and not talking about warfighting is problematic.
But that's what the Army does, General. I'm looking here, Army policy on transgender military service, where you guys require training on this stuff. So don't you think that when you require training on how to deal with men and women's shower stalls, and when you have these mandatory trainings on transgender service members, that takes away from our focus on warfighting?
Yeah, I think what, again, from Chief of Staff of the Army, my focus is very clear. I talk to every commander, every sergeant major in the Army. I do it every single month, and what I talk about is our job is to build cohesive teams that are highly trained, they're disciplined, they're fit, and they're ready to fight and win. And that's where I'm at.
But I am positing that when there is a focus on how biological men are going to shower with women, and on unconscious bias training, which you require, and on mandatory gender sensitivity training, that the call is coming from inside the house at DOD on some of these problems. And the proof's in the pudding. That there seems to be a cognitive dissonance between your recruiting nightmare that we are living through, the nation's recruiting nightmare at the Army, and this kind of stuff. Because I don't think it's going to be a big, positive recruiting pitch to women that when someone shows up with male genitalia in their shower stall, that we tell them that we're trying to build a cohesive team. I would posit to you that that probably makes the team a little less cohesive. Will you allow for even that possibility?
Congressman, what we've seen in our surveys is that basically women are more worried about being sexually harassed in the Army than they are about the kinds of things
Well,
that you're
don't you
bringing up.
think that someone might get sexually harassed if they're showering with a biological male? Don't you think that environment could potentially increase the likelihood of that? We're all concerned about sexual harassment. We've grappled with these challenges about how to have it in the chain of command or outside the chain of command, but it seems a little silly to sit here and have discussions about the flow chart of a sexual harassment complaint when you've got people with male genitalia showering with your female soldiers. I want to recruit talented women into our Army, and I'm concerned that this weird stuff that you guys are doing is not going to make it more likely that those people are going to sign up. General McConville, you and I spoke yesterday about the fact that the Army has to recruit extensively men from the American South, that makes up a wide variety of who's coming into the United States Army. You think you're going to recruit more of them with this kind of stuff?
Probably not.
And that's the point.
And
I appreciate the honesty. And I know that in August you conclude a storied career, and we thank you both for your service. And we did get somewhere with this last time with Secretary Austin, and I hope you all will reflect on the damage that this embrace of DEI is doing to the military.
Who's next? Oh, Ms. Strickland's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. The United States has a long and proud tradition of offering immigrants a path to citizenship through military service. From the Lodge Act of the 1950s to the Military Bases Agreement of the 1990s, America's leaders have found creative ways to improve readiness through the call of service. Secretary Wormuth, with such an acute recruiting crisis at hand, what is the Army doing to avail themselves of the thousands of dreamers and other undocumented young men and women eager for a path to citizenship?
Thank you, Congresswoman. I know that the department has, for example, your colleague in the Senate, Senator Duckworth, has introduced legislation that is focused on, trying to look at dreamers and others who might be interested in serving in the military. And the department is very supportive of looking at finding ways, for example, to bring the dreamers into the Army and the other services as a pathway to citizenship. And so I think we would very much welcome that.
Thank you. My next question is for General McConville. I was pleased to see the selection of Sergeant Major Joanne Nauman as the next Command Sergeant Major of Army Special Operations Command, the first woman to occupy the position. I'm trying to make eye contact with you, sir. As you know, special operations experience is frequently a common denominator among many of the Army senior leaders. Are you satisfied that there are career pipelines available to women capable of consistently producing general officers? Part one. And then part two, what are you doing to ensure that women are both aware of and encouraged to pursue opportunities in the special operations community?
Well, first of all, we're very proud of the women that are serving in the special operations community, and I think now that we have assignments opened up to everybody, that based on your merit, you can rise to the highest levels. We have Laura Richardson, who is a 4-star general who came out of combat aviation, but in the military, or at least in the Army, the combat arms tend to have more general officers than the other branches, so those branches are open. And then we also have an obligation to just like anyone else, is recognize that talent throughout the ranks and make sure they get the appropriate experiences so when they get to that level, they are highly qualified for those jobs.
Great, and I just want to go on record to let you all know that the majority of this country supports the work you do and understands that a diverse, equitable, and inclusive military is a strong one. We have a volunteer military, and everyone who is qualified, who wants to serve, should have the ability to do so. So thank you very much for your leadership. I yield my time, Mr. Chair.
Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Fallon, for 5 minutes.
General McConville, thank you for your service and your storied career. And this may sound odd coming from someone from Texas, but go Red Sox. General McConville, did General Milley over the last few weeks perhaps talk to you about the Humvee, ABS, and ESC program?
Yes, he has.
Wonderful, because we had talked, and he did promise me in this committee room that he was going to discuss this with you, and I'm glad he did. Thank you for that. Secretary Wormuth, Does the name Specialist Luis Herrera mean anything to you?
I'm not sure that I've heard of that specialist, Congressman.
Okay, that Specialist Herrera is from Marin, North Carolina, and he was killed in a rollover with the Humvees. And as you know, there have been about 900 of these incidents, and we've lost 125 service members to rollovers. And we are very supportive. We have a bipartisan group of members on this committee that have allocated nearly $300 million for this program to retrofit approximately how many Humvees? Do you know offhand?
Well, we have 106,000, I think, approximately in the overall fleet right now.
And there's about, from what the Army told us, in the neighborhood of 48,000 that are eligible for retrofitting. And why this is important is it saves lives, number one. Also, instead of buying new ones, this will save the Army $8 billion to retrofit them instead of buying new ones. And so my question is, in fiscal year 22, we allocated $193 million. And Secretary, we haven't even spent all of that money yet. And then last year, we allocated $119 million for this fiscal year. And I believe that money hasn't even been touched yet. And from what we're being told, there are between 500 and 700 vehicles that are being retrofitted every month. The problem is the kit manufacturer and the folks that actually do the labor at Red River Army Depot are telling us that they have the capabilities to retrofit 1,000 to 1,200 per month. And when we drag our feet, military members are losing their lives. So I'd like to ask, why in the world are we delaying when this is not a controversial issue? We have bipartisan support on it, and it's saving the taxpayers billions of dollars and soldiers' lives.
Well, Congressman, of course, we take the safety of our soldiers incredibly seriously. And, we never want to see soldiers be injured or die in accidents that are preventable. As you said, we are investing. We are taking a sort of a combined approach of retrofitting our existing Humvees. And it was my sense that we had not only been doing that at sort of full rate at Red River, but that we had actually had to spread some of that work to other locations. But then we are also buying some new JLTVs that have the anti-lock brake systems on them, because the Humvee is an old vehicle and we want to get new vehicles.
We're moving towards those. But in a November 2022 meeting, we met with the program office and General Werner and let them know, if you need any help from us, please, you need any authorizations or anything, we're here for you. And so I'm begging you and General McConville to help us out, because the money is there, the labor is there. And I think that we need, the vendor has been very successful, and we need a contract that lasts a year. We're giving you money on an annual basis to get this work done, because it's absolutely inexcusable. So just in summary, we save $8 billion, and General McConville, I'm sure if we gave you $8 billion, you could put it to good use. It saves lives, but we're again dragging our feet. And please, can you commit to us, Madam Secretary, that we can get this up to full capacity immediately?
Congressman, I'm certainly happy to look at, if there is money that is not being spent and there is capacity of the workforce, I'm happy to look into that.
From what we're told, it's over $100 million that hasn't been spent, and there is the capacity there. So I'd love to work with your office.
I'll certainly look into that. Happy to work with you on that.
Thank you. Thank you, General. And again, congratulations on a storied career. You are a great American, sir. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Chair, and I recognize the gentlelady from Virginia, Ms. McClellan, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. General McConville, thank you for your service and congratulations on your retirement. I have the pleasure of representing Fort Gregg Adams, formerly known as Fort Lee, and I want to take a deeper dive on some of the quality of life issues. First, I will say the 3 issues we hear the most from the servicemen and women and their families is housing, particularly the quality of the barracks and the dormitories there, access to mental health services and mental health workforce, and childcare. We've touched on each of those, but I want to dive a little bit deeper into childcare, and I'm making my staff nervous by asking a completely off-scripted question. Following up on your comment, Madam Madam Secretary, on the difficulty of getting background checks. Does the DOD, do you do your own background checks, or do you rely on those done by state or local
I believe we rely on, I think, the department's consolidated agency that does background checks.
And do you allow portable background checks, or do you have to have a background check every time a person applies for a particular child care job?
I would imagine we probably check every time.
Okay, we have found in Virginia that when we allow portable background checks, that opens up a lot of doors, because we saw where someone may be applying for 5 different child care jobs. They had to get a background check every single time. If they get a job within a year, they'd have to get another background check, and there was a huge backlog. So if that is something we need to look into for you all, I think we should. I think we also need, well, are you finding the challenges to increasing the workforce greater or about the same for your child development centers versus your centers for school-age children?
I think I would say they're about the same. I mean, we're really just in a war for talent against, the private sector, Walmart, Amazon, Target, you name it.
Thank you. And child care is not just about providing care. I think they're called child development centers for a reason, because you are developing the child. And we know that 90% of a child's brain is developed before they're 5. And so can you talk about what you all are doing through your child care programs to ensure kindergarten readiness, and in your school-age programs to ensure that you are helping those children with any sort of K-12 needs that they have?
Sure. One, I would say I was a working mom. My kids are now off in college, but anytime I go to see an Army daycare center, I'm just really impressed by the quality of the facilities, but also the staff. We have very strict standards for certification for our daycare workers. So they have to be trained and certified to be able to provide age-appropriate educational development. And I think, to my knowledge, we are doing everything that we are supposed to be doing to get kids ready for kindergarten.
And as part of that, are you developing partnerships with the school superintendents in the area so that you can ensure that whatever curriculum you're using in your child development centers is aligned with the curriculum that they will face when they begin kindergarten?
I would have to look into that, Congresswoman, to see if we're doing that specifically. I know in many locales we are partnering with colleges and universities that have children's education programs and bringing in those students to be basically interns in our daycare centers, for example.
If you're not, I strongly encourage you to do that, because what we've also seen and studies show is if those curriculum are not aligned, all of the gains that child gained before they started kindergarten will be lost by 3rd grade because those curriculum are not aligned. And you really are laying the foundation for those children on whether or not they are going to succeed once they enter kindergarten and beyond. So I strongly encourage you to do that. And I probably don't have time for another question. So again, General, I want to thank you for your service, and thank you all for testifying here today. And if you have not been to Fort Gregg Adams to look at the barracks and the dormitories there, I invite you to do that. They really need some attention as well.
Thank you.
I thank the gentlelady. That's an excellent line of questioning. Chair now recognizes a gentleman from Georgia, Dr. McCormick, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. General, first of all, it's a pleasure to see you in person. Thank you for your service. We've actually known some of the same people. We've served in some of the same places and the same of the units, and I just found out recently that you actually yelled at a junior Army officer who happens to be now my chief, so I get to yell at him every day too. So we have that in common also. Philip Singleton, I'm sure he'll be happy to hear I said that. I'm a little bit concerned as we move forward into the next generation of weapon systems. Squad automatic, when I grew up, was the M249. Now we're moving into a different caliber weapon, away from the 5.56 into a 6.88 or 6.8, I believe. It's not a 7.72. It's not a standard round that we've had in the past. So we're starting a whole new chain of ammunition production that we've never had before. And Is it a NATO round, by the way?
No, Congressman, I
Okay.
don't believe so.
So my concern is, obviously, we do a lot of joint operations. We're going to have a lot of supply around the world of different munitions. You can see what we're doing with Ukraine. If we're going to give them weapon systems or ammunition, why would we go away from something we've basically standardized since the Napoleonic era, where we tried to standardize ammunition size and something we distribute? Why would we go to a new size of a caliber weapon system at this time in history? I don't get it.
Well, I think, and I'm sure the chief would want to elaborate on this, but it's my understanding that we needed to do that because of we needed the sort of penetration ability that that new caliber could give us, given some of the adversaries and equipment that they have.
Yeah, I would just say lethality, and I think we owe you, a private meeting on this thing. We get behind the scenes. I just talked to, one of our senior leaders who's got tremendous operational experience and probably one of the best in the Army, and I asked him about the new weapon system. He says it's the best he's ever seen, and this person, I'm glad to, share with you who he is and his background.
Okay.
But there's a reason we went to that caliber. That caliber is the perfect sweet spot. The weapon itself, and this is someone that's served in our most elite units and have done some incredible things. He was just talking about how lethal this is going to change the way our soldiers operate on the battlefield, and that's why we went to the 6.8.
And the 7.62, just a little bit too large.
A little too large, and the 5.56 was just a little, again, we were aware of the logistics. We did take a hard look at that, but, at the end of the day, what drove this capability is lethality, and we owe you a briefing on
Okay, great. And
behind that.
maybe it'll become a new standard for NATO forces, too, as we move on. That'd be awesome. Singapore has a newly established digital and intelligence service, and they're seeking partnerships with other countries, especially allied nations, militaries, notable to those dedicated cyber services. Cybercom is obviously our focal point. However, they're persistently stretched beyond their resources right now. Like our Singaporean counterparts, do you think if we supported a dedicated cyber service which could offer bandwidth beyond what we are currently afforded by Cybercom today, would that be a good thing?
Congressman, I don't think the department's done a study yet looking at a separate cyber force. I personally, my sense at this point is I would be reluctant to go in that direction, and here's why. As I came to understand when I became Secretary of the Army, we're the biggest consumer, actually, of space capabilities, not the Air Force. And we have the best understanding of what our needs are. And I think we have the best understanding of what our cyber needs are. And I'm sure the Air Force has its own unique needs. So I would be concerned that by creating a standalone cyber force, you would be creating, new headquarters, new billets for GOs, and might actually be taking it away from the home services, if you will, that know best what their requirements are.
It's interesting. Those were my concerns as well when I was briefed on this, because there's obviously a point and counterpoint to this. There's advantages and disadvantages, but that's exactly my concerns that I issued also. I'm running out short, so I'm going to kind of actually, we'll stick to this because this is my home district, or at least near me, Fort Gordon. Recently, there's been some reports on the dilapidated state of that. And you mentioned actually in your open remarks that that's a concern of yours. But it sounded like other people have forts in their areas that are also, and I'm a Marine, so I'm used to some austere facilities, but do you think you have enough for your budget to make those improvements that are needed right now?
Well, Congressman, I would say, the inventory of our housing is enormous, so we don't have enough in our budget to get it done in 1 or 2 years. But we just, sent some of our officials to Fort Gordon, and we are laser focused on Balfour Beatty and getting them to improve the housing at Fort Gordon.
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair, I recognize the gentleman from Nevada, Mr. Horsford, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and to the ranking member, General McConville, congratulations. Thank you for your service, and best to you and your family. I have 4 military installations in my district, in Nevada's 4th District. One of them is the Hawthorne Army Depot, which is housed on over 140,000 acres and provides an explosive storage capacity of 7,685,000 square feet. It's quite a important and secure facility. I'm just curious, when was the last time either of you visited the Hawthorne Army Depot, and what did you think of the facilities and the equipment of the the base?
Congressman, I have not yet been to Hawthorne, but what I can tell you from some of the other depots and ammo plants I've been to is I am always incredibly impressed by the quality of the workforce there and the pride they take in the work that they do, and I imagine that I would see that if I went to Hawthorne tomorrow.
Well, I will extend an invitation. We have Armed Services Day on May 20th. It's the greatest parade in the country, and we'll have the American flag that will rise and walk down the streets of Hawthorne. Can you outline some of the steps that you're taking to address the special requirements and funding needs of the smaller rural installations in order to ensure proper maintenance and readiness at these crucial sites?
Certainly. You know, for all of our ammo plants, depots, and arsenals, a lot of them are very old and in need of reinvestment because they provide critical capabilities for us. So we have a 15-year plan to try to basically modernize our industrial base. And what we have done is essentially identify $18 billion worth of requirements to invest in them, and this year's budget has $1.5 billion focused on updating our arsenals and depots.
Thank you. I agree, and I believe investing in the future force relies on timely, adequate, predictable, and sustainable funding in every budget cycle in concert with the focus plan. So I look forward to working with you on that. Secretary Wormuth, thank you for stating both in your testimony and in response to one of the colleagues on the other side that the Army is committed to reducing the harmful behaviors that break trust with soldiers and the American people. These harmful behaviors you list as sexual assault and harassment, acts of extremism, and racism, among others. Can you expand on what the Army is currently doing to reduce these behaviors?
Certainly. You know, and I think it's really important because we have to have cohesive teams, as General McConville has said multiple times. You know, we bring together young people from all around the country, from all different kinds of backgrounds, and they've got to be able to work together and respect each other. So we really try and focus on making sure that our soldiers know what right looks like and, frankly, what wrong looks like. So a lot of our training around sexual harassment, for example, is focused on helping our soldiers know what they can do and what they shouldn't be doing. And one of the things we're doing to help us across the board, whether it's with sexual harassment or suicide prevention, is hiring a prevention workforce so that we can have folks who are really focused on trying to make sure these behaviors don't happen in the first place. And we've hired the first tranche of prevention workers, but we're going to continue to be doing that in the next couple of years.
Thank you. Finally, I care about our military members and their concerns, and if we push changes on them without a sound strategy to fulfill the mission line, then the holistic concept of readiness is not fully achieved. With this in mind, the Army's new unit life cycle model designed to address readiness issues caused by high operational tempo has come under question due to the emerging COCOM requirements that challenge it. Has the Army made a plan to combat these issues to achieve the full stated implementation by 2023?
Congressman, what we're really trying to do, our biggest challenge is unpredictability of world events. You know, we need to be able to take units that are going to get some of this new equipment and give them a protected period of time to shed their old equipment and get their new equipment and start training on their new equipment. So what we're really focused on is working with our combatant commanders to try to get more predictability on what their needs are going to be. And that's the chief does that in his role as a member of the Joint Chiefs. I'll be honest with you, it's a constant struggle because the world is unpredictable, but we're trying hard to stay agile.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Finstead, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers and Ranking Member Smith. Thank you as well, Madam Secretary and General. I'm relatively new to this committee, and I was told early on that you never want to get in between a hungry general and his lunch. And here I am. So I'll be specific and quick and get you out of here as soon as we can. But I'd like to introduce and touch on a specific issue that impacts so many active duty servicemen and women as well as veterans, and that's hearing loss. And as a farmer who's grown up around, large large, loud equipment, this resonates to me. And so according to the Defense Hearing Center of Excellence, the ability to hear and communicate is critical to soldier and unit safety, central to effective command and control, and integral to mission accomplishment. However, despite military services stressing the importance of using hearing protection and the establishment of conservation programs, military hearing loss and auditory injuries remain a consistent issue, including with our veteran population, where the Veteran Benefits Administration reported that in fiscal year 2022, there were over 2.7 million veterans receiving disability compensation for tinnitus and 1.4 million veterans receiving benefits for hearing loss. These numbers make tinnitus and hearing loss the #1 and #3 combat-related injury for our service members. Our military men and women are equipped with the best technology available, and this should be the same when it comes to hearing protection. Many individuals do not wear passive protection, such as foam earplugs, because they only suppress noise and do not allow for situational awareness. And again, as a farmer, guilty of this also. Conversely, active hearing protection technology can prevent hearing injury. And again, I just want to say active hearing protection technology can prevent hearing injury while allowing service members to remain aware of their operational environment. A benefit from improved overall situational awareness and increasing mission effectiveness, safety, and survivability. Active hearing protection devices have the potential to save the Defense Department and Veterans Administration millions of dollars by reducing hearing injuries and post-service disabilities. So with that said, and again, keeping this very focused, General, can you provide us with an update, or Madam Secretary, of an update of what the Army is doing to fulfill the Department of Defense's policy of protecting all military personnel and noise-exposed civilian personnel from hearing loss resulting from hazardous occupational and operational noise exposure? And have you found any of these programs successful for the Army?
Well, Congressman, certainly we want to make sure, again, that our soldiers are protected. And my husband is retired Navy, not retired Army, but he definitely has hearing loss from his time in the Navy. And as you said, we have a hearing center of excellence, and our PEO soldier is always looking for new technologies to be able to make sure that our soldiers' hearing is protected. So I think, that's generally, we use our hearing center of excellence and our PEO soldier to look at new technologies and to test new technologies. I would have to take your question for the record to give you a more detailed answer on what programs we found to be successful.
General, any comments on this?
No, I think we've made tremendous strides from when I came in the Army in 1977 in West Point. I think, just like you said, having flown helicopters for 35, 40 years, and we probably were not as sensitized to hearing loss as we are, and we if we could walk it back, we might have done things differently. But I do, I have two sons that are pilots now. I see the active protection that they have. We've had some problems with hearing protection over the years when we thought we had hearing protection and we did not have hearing protection, and that's a different story. But I do think that that's definitely part of our safety training. It's definitely part of those who are around, and trying to get that sweet spot where you can hear, what's going on for situational awareness at the same time. Protect your hearing is what is very important.
Yeah, so I would just say that, with the advancement of technology, this is, there's all kinds of awesome products now that exist. And, and Madam Secretary, to your point, my wife says I have a listening loss problem, not a hearing loss problem. So maybe that's what's going on. But no, I just thank you both. I want to reiterate the importance of the active duty hearing protection and urge you both just to continue to work to ensure that we are providing our servicemen and women with adequate protections so that they will not suffer these lifelong consequences. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll yield back.
Mr. Finstead, my wife says I suffer from the same disability. Gentleman from New Mexico, Mr. Vasquez, is recognized.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Secretary Wormuth and General McConville, for taking the time to speak with us today. My district in southern New Mexico is home to White Sands Missile Range, just outside of Las Cruces, where we say the first mile of missile testing is free at 5,200 feet. But this part of the country has also historically had some disadvantages, and it's been susceptible to extremely high winds, flash flooding, record monsoons, which can lead to power outages and other disruptions to energy systems. Earlier this year, construction began on a microgrid system at White Sands that will be capable of providing 14 days of power for the installation's water system, should there be a wider power outage. This project is funded under the Energy Resilience and Conservation Investment Program, or ERSIP. While this is a critical step in the right direction, it's only the beginning of a long list of important infrastructure projects that are needed at White Sands and across the country, as we've heard today. General McConville, can you talk about how the Army is approaching energy resiliency on bases and the advantages of programs like ERSIP that use appropriated funds versus third-party financing vehicles or even utilities privatization as a means of achieving energy resiliency?
Well, I look at it as far as energy resiliency really as a readiness factor on our camps, posts, and forts. And when I look at it, is we got to be ready to operate 24/7. So if something happens out in the community, we've seen this happen. Having the capability to do that is absolutely essential. How we do that, I defer to those who actually make those type decisions. What's the best path? We want to do most efficiently, effectively. But at the end of the day, I want to make sure that our posts can operate, because we never know when we're going to get the call.
Thank you, General. And so would you say that then renewable energy projects and the complementary microgrids help greatly with the readiness of military installations like White Sands Missile Range and should continue to be part of the overall investment?
Well, what I would say is having energy resiliency at a post is very important. How we do that, I'd have to take a look at each of the programs and come back with a recommendation.
Thank you so much, General. I also want to talk about three of the other Army's priorities: people, readiness, and modernization. Particularly, the first and most important is the people who serve. As the Department of Defense's premier research and testing facility, it's of extreme importance to me that we have service members at White Sands Missile Range that are taken care of. Recently, my staff visited White Sands, and I was disappointed to learn that members of our Special Ops Forces are living outside in tents, and it's not temporary. They said that when the wind picks up, the tents are literally blown away, especially during this windy season in New Mexico. Even if the soldiers were in permanent housing, the barracks at White Sands Missile Range are outdated and don't meet the standards of square footage per soldier. We've heard from many colleagues that this is a recurring issue at some of their existing forts and other military installations as well. For us, these are amongst our most highly trained units, our Special Ops Forces. And right now, they don't have the dignity of having a roof over their head. We have to do better, and we should do better. Secretary Wormuth, when does the Army plan to upgrade facilities at White Sands Missile Range to properly house the soldiers in my district?
Well, first of all, Congressman, I would say, and I will give a call to General John Braga.
I don't think your microphone's on.
Oh, I'm sorry. First of all, I will look into the situation that you're calling my attention to right away, and I'll talk to General John Braga at USASOC. Just as I went down to USASOC and heard about the barracks at Smoke Bomb Hill at Fort Bragg. They were unsatisfactory, and we got our soldiers out immediately. So we may have a similar situation here. I think what you've probably heard through the course of the morning is that our inventory of barracks is so enormous that we can't get to all of it that needs to be remodeled or torn down and rebuilt in just a year or two. So we're trying to go about it in an organized, prioritized way, but I'll look specifically at the situation at White Sands.
Thank you, Secretary. And this is an Air Force issue, but similarly at Holloman Air Force Base, we have also heard that the prioritization of housing improvements is not made in an equitable way and doesn't consider some of these environmental factors or the requirements of training and the hardships of training for specific missions. So I think we could figure out a better way to categorize the expenditures that we're going to make based on a different priority level that helps folks like the Special Ops Forces at White Sands Missile Range, so they're not put to or kicked to the bottom of a list because they don't meet outdated requirements. So thank you for that, working on that, Secretary. And General, thank you for your legacy of service. I truly appreciate it. And with that, I yield back my time. Thank you, Chairman.
Yeah, Secretary, I think that you can tell from Mr. Vasquez's questioning and a whole host of people is housing is one of the big problems. And, you heard from me and the ranking member yesterday, this is a priority for us. I would like for you to, and your colleagues in the other services to get us an aggressive plan for remedying that and let us worry about the money. And because we're serious about going after this, but help us help you. Chair now recognizes a gentleman from Guam, Mr. Moreland, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, a key corridor for the movement of military material is from Guam's harbor to Andersen Air Force Base. Currently, this movement places a strain on our public roads and could pose a security vulnerability. If the Department of Defense were to construct a defense access road from the harbor to Andersen Air Force Base, first, what role could the Army Corps of Engineers play? And second, would your office be open to extending this discussion and possibly supporting the funding of a study for this endeavor?
Thank you, Congressman. I'm actually going to be going out to Guam later this summer, so I look forward to seeing the situation there for myself. I've not yet been there before. As we continue to put the plan together for defense of Guam, there are going to be a lot of investments in Guam and the infrastructure there. I'm certain that the Army Corps of Engineers would play a critical role, broadly in terms of improving the infrastructure, but specifically potentially on this road. I'm not familiar with the specific access roads that you're mentioning, but would certainly be happy to learn more about it.
Thank you. My next question is, I understand the Medal of Honor is a distinguished recognition provided to service members for their selfless and heroic acts. But sadly, despite having among the highest number of enlistments in the nation per capita, no one from Guam has ever been recognized for this at this level. This includes a hero who threw himself at a grenade during the Vietnam conflict to protect his company. While he survived, he suffered lifelong injuries until he passed away several years ago. Now, 59 heroes made similar sacrifices during the Vietnam War and were awarded the Distinguished Medal of Honor. And in fact, there were 12 such heroes from World War II, 26 from the Korean War, and 1 from the Afghan War, all honored with this medal. Would you say that a specialist from Guam whose heroic efforts were literally he lost his life, but saved others in a war he was drafted to fight in, is deserving of such an honor?
Congressman, as you probably know, we have a very rigorous process to consider individuals for the Medal of Honor. Often, particularly if the person has passed away, it can be challenging to rebuild the records. But if there is new information that has come to light for this specialist that you believe bolsters the case for him being considered for the Medal of Honor, I would be happy to have my team work with your office to submit those records so that his package could be considered.
Thank you. Actually, those records were submitted before, but as it works up the chain, somehow it always disappears. But we do have the copies, and we will work with you on that to resubmit for that medal.
Thank you. Happy to work with you.
And finally, for my last question, yesterday, Admiral Aquino testified that he needed an additional $147 million to integrate the Joint Missile Defense System in Guam, as reflected by his unfunded priority list. With this additional funding, would the 94th Army Air and Missile Defense Command be able to improve its capacity for joint coordination, and how does the Army's budget support a layer of 360-degree missile defense of Guam?
Congressman, we've made a number of investments in our budget in integrated air and missile defenses. I don't have the figure right off the top of my head, but I know Admiral Aquilino has a long list of things that he would like to see invested in Indo-PACOM. We have $185 billion a year. The chief and I try to do the best we can to take care of our people, invest in new weapon systems, and maintain our readiness. So we've made some investments. I'm sure Admiral Aquilino would like us to do more.
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Secretary, but I would stress the $140 million is absolutely necessary. It's on top of his priority list. I think without this, we're putting our troops at danger, and especially our district and Guam, many U.S. lives in danger. The more forward we get this, the more we are able to complete this, and the Admiral has spoken about it, just like the completion of our forts on Guam with the additional H-2B workers. Without this, with this, it will make a great difference. Without this, it will be very harmful to our nation's defense, and I'm very concerned about our citizens on Guam, our American citizens there. So please, let's make sure we get that priority that the Admiral has specifically said.
Gentleman's time
Very
has expired.
important.
Chair
Thank you,
now
Mr.
recognizes
Chair.
the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Davis, for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Also would like to thank Madam Secretary, to the General, thank you so much, and we appreciate your service. I'm concerned as we're fighting to maintain the freedom and security of the American people. We also obviously have to continue fighting for our kids here. So I'm very much concerned about the lack of child care development centers at many of our installations in North Carolina. There are numerous installations that need new or additional CDCs at Fort Bragg. There is currently an 800 child backlog for spots at the existing CDCs on the post. The real number, who knows what that is, because I'm sure at some point you see there's an 800 child backlog, you just say, I give up and not even, sign up. This is not just a North Carolina issue, I do understand is more broader in the Army, but going beyond just staffing, what is the Army doing to help address the issue? And I'm going to ask in a couple ways on the post itself, but then off post in terms of, building relationships to absorb this capacity, because at the end of the day, we have to provide our soldiers with sufficient access to child care so that their focus can be on defending the nation.
Thank you, Congressman, and you're right. It is not just a Fort Bragg problem. It's something I hear about pretty much everywhere I go. We're trying to do a few different things, as I think you are aware. One is to build, more CDCs. We've built a number of them in the last couple of years, and we're going to be building several more in the coming years. Part of it is about optimizing the level of staffing. We're also trying to get more families on post to participate in our family child care center, which is basically sort of in-home daycare. We're trying to incentivize that where households that have participated in that who PCS but stay in the program get sort of a bonus, because again, we're trying to sort of thicken the capacity there. And then we've also increased the monthly subsidy, the fee assistance that we provide folks who go off post to get daycare. So we've raised that from $1,500 a month to about $1,700 a month. So we're trying to get after it in as many different ways as we can.
Okay, and I absolutely agree with the statement provided in this testimony that every single suicide is one tragedy too many. Which brings me to another concern. Suicide prevention is an issue that I raised personally with Secretary Austin, and I'm grateful for his commitment, the funding with the workforce and the funds that we're moving through the Congress. But when we look specifically at the Army compared to 2021, and we see a decrease by 2022, I'm just understanding based on what you were sharing earlier, this move towards prevention, a prevention workforce. Would you attribute that as to helping to curtail?
Well, Congressman, we've just started hiring the prevention workforce. So I think the decrease that we saw last year, you can't attribute to that. I think, what I have seen is a lot of our great leaders, really putting a spotlight and putting their energy on this. So General, Brian Eifler up in Alaska, for example, and his team, they've been really focused on it. I think the prevention workforce will help us. Part of what they're going to do is help us make better use of the data that we have so that we can try to predict things and see trends better. But I think, what's working from what I can tell, and it's hard to tell, is application of behavioral health resources, but also chaplains, military family life counselors, trying to help soldiers. A lot of the causes sometimes you see behind suicide are relationship problems, substance abuse problems, money problems. So giving our soldiers resources to help with their marriages, help with their finances, that helps. And just emphasizing connections between our leaders, our soldiers, their buddies, and their families. But it's a hard problem.
Going back to the prevention workforce, do you see it helping, is there any way of gauging how it may actually help?
I think, as we hire more of the prevention workforce and sort of have them fan out across our major installations, we'll be better able to see how it's helping. Certainly our intent and our belief is that having people who are able to help us focus on stopping harmful behaviors before they happen will help us.
Thank you so much again, and we do yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank the gentleman. That was an excellent line of questioning. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from, is it Missouri? Next. Mills. Mills from Florida is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I know that we're talking a lot about the Army budget, and one of the things we continually talk about is support and build up for our industrial base. I've had the unique pleasure of not only serving on this great committee, but also as a United States Army combat veteran and a defense owner of a business who has real understanding of what we face today, whether it's through Picatinny, PEO, or any other procurement arms. The thing that I continue to see time and time again, and this really impacted us when we went to that lowest cost technically acceptable bid, but then failed to understand that we still had a best and final offer approach that if a person who had qualified for BAFO, meaning they meet the technical acceptabilities, but was outside of the 20% competitive range, even though they would have saved taxpayers money, they would be removed from the bid. And when I was recognizing this, and it was tailored more towards the primary large defense business industry, there was another creation that had occurred with a mentor-protege program, which essentially became something that was utilized by the larger companies to do nothing but utilize the smaller ones for tax shelters or to ensure they didn't get a certain amount of revenue, which would have actually allowed them to show profits. So I look at the fact that while I do agree, this is the time when we need to be focusing on not just our industrial base build out, but I really truly believe that we need to also be looking at procurement reform where we're slowing down our ability. And right now it's about keeping the fastest pace. And I think that what we need to be looking at is true procurement reform that not only supports the things that we need to put into the field, but also ensuring that the Directorate of Defense Trade Controls, when it comes to the weaponization or the dismissals from our DSP-5 and DSP-83s, the timeliness of how we do our approvals, really needs to be reviewed. And so my question for you, Madam Secretary, is do you support procurement reform with regards to how we're conducting things now?
Certainly, Congressman. I'm always in favor of looking at how we can develop and acquire and field new capabilities more efficiently and effectively.
And the other thing that I notice is that while we look at things, and I'll just utilize the Iowa Army munition factory as an example, most of these facilities are GOCO-run facilities where it's a government-owned, corporate-operated facility, which actually in turn is not the most cost-effective, and in many cases, the way that it is laid out and designed, it makes it very ineffective. The example of that is when the Iowa Army Munition Factory was bidding to try and support the build-out for the Australian Defense Force and the ADF, they actually couldn't get the quality to exceed that of a smaller private company, even after billions of dollars in investment. And so, one of the things that I looked at in the reasoning for this, that these companies kept being able to run these GOCOs, is that there's a bit of a conflict of interest that's been established whereby many of the members who are within the contracting department don't have the necessary moratorium time. And so as soon as they actually start contracting operations, they, in most cases, are just thinking about whether or not they can go sit on the board of that company right after they retire. So do you support a moratorium that would enable that we could kind of reduce or deconflict some of that is going on within the contracting agencies?
Congressman, I would certainly be open to looking at what kinds of policies can be put in place to avoid conflicts of interest. As a political appointee, I certainly have a 2-year window, and I think looking at those kinds of policies is appropriate.
And I think that one of the things that's been abused for far too long is that there is a kind of 1 to 2 year icing period, but what happens in the loophole is that I, for example, am not allowed to talk directly with you because we may have contracted, but what I can do is ask my great colleague Mark Alford to go ahead and call and say, hey, tell the secretary that I said hello from me, Corey Mills. And immediately they know that I'm at that company, and now I've not directly contracted and discussed anything with you, but we know that that's the loophole that kind of is worked around. So I want to tell you that I am all in favor, 100%, of supporting the Army and what you're trying to do, as well as for the entire defense industry and building our capabilities to meet our adversaries. But I want to ensure, as a United States Congressman, that we're always being good stewards of the taxpayers' money. And so we have a lot of great challenges that we must face. I know that you guys are dealing not just with the industrial base, but recruitment efforts, and I think that a lot of that you're addressing right now is to improve the quality of life of our soldiers, which is truly important, which will get our recruitment up, taking care of the spouses, getting the necessary counseling that is needed, making sure child care is there, making sure that our salary increases reflect what is necessary for them to not have to worry about their spouse when they're abroad. So I commend you on the efforts to try and do this and hope that we can look more stringent when it comes to our procurement process. With that, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Alford, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ranking Member, thank you. Just to clarify, Mr. Mills, I'm not going into business with you anytime soon, all right? We have an important job to do here. Well, thank you so much for being here. I know we're at the end of the day. You get the front row here, but we're almost done. We've talked a lot in this committee about the unprecedented recruitment crisis in the military. As you know, the Army has very much struggled, missing its 2022 recruitment goals by 15,000 soldiers, roughly 25%. I believe that part of this issue is improving our barracks, making it more livable for our men and women who are willing to serve, who are willing to die for our country. It's going to help in our recruitment efforts. I recently visited Fort Leonard Wood, which is in our district. We trained some, or they trained some 80,000 personnel each year. A great, fantastic facility. But they have some problems down there. Problems with their housing. We need to prioritize this for phase 2 of the Advanced Individual Training Barracks and Modernization, and we need to modernize some of our ranges down there. I was in one of the barracks that was built some 50 years ago, and they are doing the best they can, making this thing run on duct tape and baling wire, basically. I saw cracks in concrete, not a danger right now, but time is of the essence in getting some places for our men and women to live that they're not looking for a palace or a Taj Mahal. They're looking for some place that is safe and operational. And I understand money is tight, very tight. And I do appreciate the funding dedicated to family housing for Fort Leonard Wood in the President's '24 budget. I want to make sure that our soldiers and their families have the best possible housing. And again, not luxurious, but something they can be proud to live in as well. As you know, it's going to take significant investment over multiple years to address the challenges, and I'm committed to working with you, working with the bases to make sure that happens. First question for Secretary Wormuth and General McConville. On February 1st of 2023, I sent a letter to both of you detailing our request to prioritize the Advanced Individual Training Barracks Phase 2 at Fort Leonard Wood. In the President's budget, or at least in the Army's unfunded priorities list, since this funding was not included in either, can you please talk about why, despite planning and design funding being appropriated in fiscal year 22, this barracks project was not included in FY24 budget requests, the Army's unfunded priorities list, nor the 5-year future year defense program? Ma'am, I'll start with you.
Thank you, Congressman, and I'm actually going to be going to Fort Leonard Wood in a couple of weeks. I look forward to that, and I will certainly go and look at the barracks that you're mentioning. You know, as I think you've heard us say in response to a number of great questions about housing, the inventory of barracks that we have in the Army that need renovation or need, frankly, just total tear down and rebuild is larger than the amount of the budget that we have in any given year or two to be able to spend. And so we have a very thorough process called the Facility Investment Plan that allows us to work with commanders, work with the commanding general at Fort Leonard Wood to try to prioritize how we're going to go about that work. And we refresh that every year because sometimes we come to realize that barracks are in worse shape than we thought, and if so, we move projects up. But at the end of the day, it boils down to we just don't have the money to do everything all at once. But I will certainly look forward to seeing those barracks and see for myself whether we need to move them up in the plan.
Thank you. And would you also please visit one of the ranges there? I believe it's range number 8. We were there. It's not even operational. We went out there, and it's sad. It's built on old 70s technology. The targets cannot ascend to where they can be shot at, and so they're losing. And I'm really worried at in a surge capacity, we're not going to have the training necessary to get our young men and women ready for active battle.
I will visit that
thank
while I'm
you.
there, sir.
General, I think the Chinese spy balloon highlighted the need to ensure that we have a collective domestic response should an attack on the homeland happen. Can you take a minute to speak to the importance of Homeland Defense mission and how the Army contributes to something that can, and we only have 20 seconds, I'm sorry.
No, I think, we exist to protect the nation, that's both home and abroad, and we have great forces here that provide, and some of the forces, on the chemical and all those type things that happen, come out of Fort Leavenworth, and we have great soldiers doing that every single day, and then that's what we exist to do.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back, and thank you for this great hearing, sir.
Thank you, and I think that the witnesses heard a theme today, and we are going to help you go after that. I really appreciate your service to this country. General, I wish you well in your retirement. Secretary, we're not through with you.
Not going anywhere.
That's right. Thank you all for your time, and we are adjourned.